Well, I'd like to welcome you all to the Dental Board's quarterly meeting. Today is Thursday, November 2nd. I want to ask us all to please turn off our cell phones or put them on silent and make sure they're off the tables so we can avoid feedback. You may notice board members accessing laptops during the meeting. They are using the laptops solely to access the board meeting materials that are in electronic format. This is an official business meeting of the Dental Board of California. The board welcomes public comment on any item on the agenda, and it is the board's intent to ask for public comment prior to the board taking action on any agenda item. If for some reason I forget to ask for public comment on an agenda item, and if you wish to speak, please raise your hand and you will be recognized. Depending on the number of people who would like to testify, a time limit may be imposed. We ask all speakers to please stay on topic, and if a time limit is necessary, keep your comments to within the time limit. With that, I would like to call the meeting to order and ask the board secretary to please call the roll.
Okay. Calling the roll. Burton?
Here.
Chan?
Here.
Chappelle Ingram here. Forsythe?
Here.
Lai?
Here.
Lay?
Yes.
McKenzie?
Here.
Medina?
Here.
Morrow?
Here.
Stewart?
Here.
Witcher?
Here.
Mr. President, we have a quorum.
Thank you, and I'll open the meeting with my report, and I'll try to be brief. I do have a few things I want to say. First of all, there are events that affect us all that occur outside the meeting and the dental community. I know that we've all heard about the really terrible fires, the Dunn fires and others in Sacramento, and we know personally that there were dentists and staff members who lost homes, and the devastation was over 1,500 structures and about 40 lives and about $3 billion in estimated damage. But out of that came a real outpouring of support. There's been fundraising, volunteer activities, stories of people helping each other in times of need. So whenever there's a natural disaster, people tend to rally, and it's really kind of gratifying to see. A little closer to home, I did want to say that we have had, some tragedies within our board family. I know that we have two board members who lost close family members, Jerry Westerfield, our executive assistant, and of course Karen, who lost her husband recently. And I know a number of us attended his celebration of life last Sunday, and it was truly a celebration of life. And I know that those of you who couldn't be there were there in spirit. And it was just wonderful to hear the recounting of the accomplishments of Jim, her husband, and the wonderful life that he and Karen shared together. With that, I'd just like to ask for a moment of silence. Thank you. Moving on to my own activities. First of all, I'd like to report that I attended the CDA Care sponsored free health care event in Bakersfield in October, and I know many of you were there. I'd like to acknowledge our Vice President, Dr. Tom Stewart, who was on the important local arrangements committee providing support for that event. And Tom tells me that we provided over 1,500 people with dental care who would not otherwise have received it. And one of the really nice things about these events, it's totally a volunteer activity. We're able to focus on patient care. That's what we do best. We're free of financial constraints and other inhibitions. Of course, we still meet all the dental board requirements as far as infection control and record keeping. But still, they're great events and really kind of inspiring to be a part of. I'd also like to mention to you all that the Assembly has been holding a series of informational hearings held by the Assembly Select Committee on Healthcare Delivery Systems and Universal Coverage. That was later in October, and that committee was appointed by Assembly Speaker Rendon. And it's interesting because it's chaired by both a physician and a dentist, one of our own, Dr. Jim Wood, and then Dr. Arambula is the physician member. And I think this shows that dentistry is part of healthcare, and whatever happens, we're going to be a part of it. Just very briefly, the first day of the hearing included a comprehensive review of California's current healthcare system, including Medicare, Medicaid, individual markets, employer-based plans, and finally safety nets. And it was clear from the discussion that great strides have been made under the Affordable Care Act in terms of insuring more people. It was really interesting to me that the majority who are uninsured are undocumented immigrants who are not covered under the ACA. You have to legally have legal status, or if children are undocumented, they have to somehow have legally recognized status to be eligible. The second day featured a discussion of universal coverage in other countries, and as most of you know, many other countries use a hybrid system that involves both some form of universal coverage and is supplemented by some kind of insurance, often government-sponsored, with rate controls. What was apparent from the statistics is that the U.S. system currently provides care at a much higher cost with similar or possibly worse outcomes compared to other developed countries. So that was kind of the take-home message. This is all on the internet. There's a series of reports. You can watch the webcast. And I know some of you actually attended the hearings in person. I just thought it was very interesting discussion kind of following on to SB 562 from last year. And I'm sure we'll be hearing more. So that concludes my report. And with that, I would like to have someone move for approval of the meeting minutes.
I'll second.
No corrections or additions. Everybody's happy. Dr. Moore.
On page number 6 of the minutes from our previous meeting, I believe it would be item number 9. About midway down in that item, it identifies a sentence starting with, however, the university has not provided documentation showing compliance with the deficiencies in BNP 1021, that should be 1024, rather than 1021.
Okay, thank you. Got the eagle eye there. Very good. Okay, we have a motion and a second.
Page 7,
Dr. Lai.
agenda item number 12, in response to Dr. Lay. Actually, I think I did it. Dr. Lay.
Okay, so noted. Seeing no other corrections, could you go ahead and call the roll? Oh, is there public comment on the meeting minutes? I'm sorry. Okay, seeing none, we're ready.
Okay, calling the row. Burton,
Yes.
Jan,
Aye.
Chappell Ingram, Forsythe,
Yes.
Lai,
Yes.
Lay, McKenzie,
Abstain.
Medina,
Aye.
Morrow,
Yes.
Stewart,
Yes.
Witcher.
Yes.
Quorum.
Thank you. Moving on, we'd like to next do the budget report. And before we get into that, I'd just like to let everybody know we are going to have a change in the order of business. I'm going to move the fee increase implementation item number 8 up to follow the budget report. So we'll go ahead and have the budget report next. Jack.
Good morning, board members. Jerry is passing out a revised fund condition for both the dentistry fund and the dental assisting fund. So my name is Zach Rasky and I'm the budget analyst with the board. Today I will be presenting the budget report, which includes the end of the year actuals for 16-17 and what else? And the fund condition, sorry, for both dental assisting fund and the dentistry fund. So the board currently manages 2 funds, that's dentistry and the dental assisting fund. Those funds are not commingled. I've provided 6 attachments, which I would like to go over first. The first attachment is the well, it has two things on it. The fiscal year, end of the year actuals for 16-17. So last time we presented the actuals, but that was from the FM12 report. So this time this includes the FM13 report, which is the end year actual expenditures. As you'll see, the total expenses for the dentistry fund is $11,170,745. And next to that is the 2017 Budget Act, which is the governor's budget. And we have our budget is $13,539,000.
You'll notice that this attachment is a little bit different than what we've provided in the past, and we have representatives from the budget office, and so, to explain why that is. So we don't have our current expenditures so far, but we're gonna present on that shortly.
Okay, so attachment 1A is the 2017 Budget Act, and this does not include the fee increases. And you'll notice that the months in reserve are going down each year. However, if you look at attachment 1B, which is, is one of the, we have a new one which we passed out, and that would be the dentistry analysis of the fund condition. This fund condition includes the fee increases, which were implemented in October. And you'll notice that we start at 5.5 in months reserve, and then we go down a little bit, but then as we start receiving the funds from the fee increases, our months in reserve will go up. Next, we have the dental assisting budget report, and this also includes the actuals for 2016-17 and the 2017 Budget Act, so the governor's budget for fiscal year 17-18. So the next page, we have attachment 2A, and this is also the dental assisting fund condition without the implementation of the fee increases. And our months in reserve in this are showing them going down each year. And then the second page that we handed out is the fund condition for the dental assisting. And this one is also with the implementation of the fee increase in October. And you'll notice in this one, the months in reserve are going down, but they start to increase again once we as we collect more as a result of the fees that we're collecting. So at this time, we do not have the expenditures for the first quarter. However, we have Marina O'Connor and Wilbert Ramboa from DCA Budget to explain more in detail.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the board. We're going to give you guys a brief update on the basically the new accounting system known as Fiscal. You may or may not know the department transitioned from CalSTARS to the new statewide accounting and budgeting system known as Fiscal as of July 10th of this year. And since then, we've been, working with our units to make great strides in understanding and transacting within that particular system. Any type of significant change or transition that is made for to any state services, inherently comes with the challenges and hurdles that we are facing at this time. One of the main challenges we've been encountered is the closing of fiscal month 1 transactions. While it was anticipated that departments that went live in July would be able to close fiscal month 1 by mid-September, and fiscal month 2 shortly after. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. It's now anticipated that fiscal month 1 will be closed in November, most likely towards the end of November, barring any other challenges or problems that arise within that system. As a result, expenditure and revenue reports have proved difficult to extract from the system and has caused a delay in providing programs with the information. We can run reports that are budget reports that are basically point in time, but it wouldn't be considered fiscal month 1 or 2 or 3. It's just a point in time. So our office is working on standardizing and formatting reports that are available in the system into a streamlined and transparent report that's easy for the boards and bureaus to understand. And we want to make sure that we provide you guys the necessary data for tracking and projections. Another side effect of the challenges we face while transacting in the system is the timing of expenditure postings and backlogs that are being worked through. Due to this timing issue, you can expect to see minimal operating expenses being recorded in fiscal month 1, as the majority of the transactions that we're able to post in the system were labor costs. Fiscal month 2 will see a spike and higher than normal expenditures being posted as the transactions are caught up for fiscal month 1. And beginning in fiscal month 3, we expect the transactions to post in a more normal fashion as the backlogs are addressed. So, as Zach addressed earlier, the reports that we provided you today, so I'm gonna go over the dentistry report. So you have the actuals that you guys spent last year, and the 2017 Budget Act. At this point in time, this is your starting point for the year. Governor's budget will be released on January 10th, 2018. And at this point, our office is incorporating any budget letters, executive orders, budget change proposals, and those items entail things like retirement adjustments, employee comp drills, and any fees such as the fee increases that staff got because of the union contracts. So at this point, we're incorporating those items into the budget, and so these numbers on the 2017 Budget Act will be changing slightly by the time Governor's budget is released. Does anyone have any questions so far? Yes.
I understand when we do our travel claims, we need to use a different form for fiscal.
Yeah.
Thought I saw something in one of the memos about that. Jerry's nodding, she'll respond.
Yeah, we had to have each member submit a standard 204, which is a vendor form, which is setting you up as a vendor instead of as the employee.
So everybody got those back to you?
Yeah.
Good.
We got all.
Okay.
If there's no further questions, is there any public comment on the agenda item?
I'll just make a comment. I'm a little uncomfortable, obviously, that we don't have the information that we need, but I believe that we really haven't changed the way we do business, so that Zach should be internally sort of getting a handle on what we would expect the expenditures and revenue reports to show us. So, I just want the board to know that I think we do have reason to be concerned a bit, especially going into sunset review, but I'm confident that the folks in the budget office are working as hard as they can to try to resolve this. It doesn't just affect the dental board, it affects all of the boards in DCA. So we'll just hope that they can get this straightened out sooner rather than later.
question. Be- I have a question because I don't understand fiscal. Is this in any way like Breeze where we will have the possibility of unanticipated cost to us for operation of the system itself?
Right now, the way you're basically charged for fiscal expenses is it's a assessment to your fund. So it's not part of your budget, you're not budgeted for it, it's just basically charged straight against your fund. So we build in every year the estimates we get from the Department of Finance on what your fiscal assessment will be each year. So it's already pretty much accounted for in your fund condition. Of course, we don't know what the actual costs will end up being until the end of that year, but as far as I know, we haven't heard anything or gotten any information as far as any reason for that estimate to be, way below what it ends up being. So we haven't gotten any information as far as, would the cost because of these delays, are these increasing your fiscal costs and what's going to be assessed against your fund? I haven't heard anything in that regards. Typically, the estimates that are built into your fund condition for those types of things like fiscal are pretty accurate. They ended up being pretty close to what you end up being charged. So, of course, if we did hear anything like, all these issues have, caused them to, who knows, hire more consultants or whatever the issue is, we would make the board, aware of it right away. But as of now, we haven't gotten any information to lead us to believe that would be the case.
So would we have any voice in arbitrating if we felt that we were overcharged or because our board is bigger than others? Is there a way for us to convey that to you and say, we don't think it's fair or, that's way over our budget?
We could certainly, it would depend on what of course the issue was. But if you're saying if you were assessed a certain amount for fiscal and you thought it was too much, we can definitely ask for, a little more information on how that number, how they came up with, whatever number the final charges end up being. I'm not really familiar with that process because we don't usually have to go through that. But of course, if you had concerns, we can raise it to Department of Finance and really try to get more information on, if we think it's too high. And they usually do afford us that option if it does arise. So I don't think that should be an issue. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, not to belabor the point, I still don't understand how this works. How is this fee for services distributed among the departments, among the boards?
That's a great question. And unfortunately, we don't get that methodology because that's done at a much higher level than our department. That's calculated by our oversight agencies. So I couldn't tell you exactly how they come up with their fiscal expenses and how much they charge each board. But we could, if that's something you guys, are interested in, you'd like to know how they come up with that number, we can definitely ask and inquire and get a little more information on how they come up with those estimates. Yeah.
And not to mix apples and oranges, but because Breeze was such a nightmare, I would like to ask through the president that we have some more definitive report at the next meeting.
Okay. Sure.
Just, I have one too. Is this going to be included under our departmental services line items?
No, so it's not part of your budget. So you won't see it on your budget report. You'll see it on your fund condition. And actually, if you can, let's see, if you actually look at the fund condition that you guys received that was handed out to you for the dental board, if you go down and look at your expenditures underneath there, you'll see 3 lines, and the middle one, it says Financial Information System of California. That's fiscal. That's your fiscal assessment right there. So as you can see,
And last year, they assessed you about $17,000, and next year, or this year, 17-18, they're estimating a similar charge. So again, we, of course, won't know till the end of the year what they'll actually end up assessing you at the end of the year for 17-18, but typically it doesn't stray far from the estimate. If it did, that would be obviously a cause for concern, not just for the dental board, but for every board, because we obviously make plans and, you know, we determine how we're going to operate based on those, you know, the accuracy of those estimates. So, you know, if that was the case, we would definitely, you know, be looking into that.
So this is a new expense that was previously covered under departmental services?
No, the fiscal has never been part of your budget. It's never been something the boards were budgeted for. It's always been an assessment against the fund. We expanded your fund condition to show prior years, you'd see it going back quite a few years, the fiscal assessment, because they've been working on it for a while.
No further questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move along and cover the fee increase implementation next.
Good morning. My name is Sarah Wallace. I'm the Assistant Executive Officer for the board. Just to provide a little bit of background of how we've gotten to where we currently are with the implementation of the fee increase that happened in October. We began a process in, I think it was 2011, 2012, where we started really evaluating the conditions of our funds. And we were seeing a trend leading towards a fiscal imbalance or a structural imbalance between the revenue and the expenditures that we are appropriated through the governor. The board is responsible as a special funded agency for the collection of revenue to sustain its expenditures that are approved by the budget, by the governor. So we do not receive any funds from the general fund or from other state agencies. We are solely responsible for producing our revenue. And so the way we do that is through the collection of fees through renewal of licenses and permits. 2011, 2012, we started talking about it. In 2012, 2013, we did an initial rulemaking to increase our renewal fee for dentist licenses that I believe at the time it was $365. That fee had been established in the mid-90s, and we moved the fee up to the statutorily authorized maximum of $450 via a rulemaking process. That fee became effective on July 1st of 2013, or 14, sorry. And then at that time, we were still working with the budget office, and we determined that even with that fee increase, we didn't have what we needed to sustain the structural imbalance. And so we had gone forward through 2014 and found an author, and it was Senator Marty Block, who helped us establish our renewal fee at $525, which was what we had worked with the budget office to establish where we needed to be at that time. Concurrently, we hired a contractor to come in and do a complete fee audit and overview of our internal processes and what our overhead costs were and where we needed to allocate those costs across all of the fees that the board had. This hadn't been done in nearly 20 years. So at that time, I believe it was in 2014, early 2015 meeting, the board had a report from Capital Accounting Partners, from Dan Eds, who came in and explained where we were with our fees and where we really should be assessing our fees. Those were then reviewed by a subcommittee, and the subcommittee came back and sought board approval to establish where the fees needed to be. The problem we incurred at that time was that our statutorily authorized maximums were outdated, and so we had to go through the statutory process to increase those statutorily authorized maximums. We did that as part of our sunset review. As you'll recall, we went to the legislature through our hearings. We included it in our board report to the legislature, And through that bill, we increased our fee caps. Once we had our fee caps increased, we then promulgated a regulation in 2016. The board approved the language at its May 2016 meeting. We initiated the rulemaking, and the final language was approved at the August 2016 meeting, which we then forwarded as the final rulemaking to the Department of Consumer Affairs, state agency, and DOF for approval. It then went to the Office of Administrative Law. Through that approval process, we finally got our approval a year later in August of 2017. And so as part of that, though, with Breeze, we're unable to just immediately increase the fee. So we had also been working with the Breeze team on when this would all be implemented. So with the approval in August, we were able to establish the fee increase via our Breeze program, which handles all of our application licensing, application fees, our licensure fees, our permit fees. And so on August 19th, Breeze flipped the switch and we had our fee increase become active. And so as of October 19th, we began collecting the revenue based on the new fee increase for all applications for licensure and permits. At the same time, all renewal notices that have the expiration date of January 31st of 2018 were mailed out in October. And so those folks that have that expiration date will now pay the new renewal fee. So this information was posted on our board website. We sent it out via email blast. We sent out a table, and it's also now included on all the applications that are available on our board website, and as well as it's printing on the new renewal forms.
Okay, any questions about the fee increase? I know we've been over this quite a bit. Now that it's been posted on the website, we've been getting some questions, which I guess would be expected. Of course, it's already going into effect, so to make any changes at this time would take a rule revision. But any questions from board members? Okay, any questions from the public?
Mary McCune with California Dental Association. CDA understands that the fee increases are already set in place, but for the next time that the fee increases are evaluated and changed, we just wanted to put on the dental board's radar that the licensure for residency was significantly higher than the rest of the licensure pathways, and we just wanted to have a conversation at that time in the future about the methodology for that, and we just wanted to put that on the record.
Yeah, we're aware of that. I went back and looked at that item and understand. I've been getting a lot of questions about the general anesthesia on-site inspection fee that went up from, I think, $250 to $2,000. But the fact is that our cost to administer that evaluation is about $4,000. And it's only done every 5 to 6 years. So proportionally, it isn't quite as bad as it looks. But it is a big jump. But
Right.
yeah, again, I can address that more specifically if there's questions about it. Otherwise, I'll leave it to another time. But we're aware of these things.
Yeah, and our reason for specifically calling out the residency portion is that when we looked at the actual cost of administering all other licensure pathways, they were pretty similar, but then the cost of implementation really spiked for that one specifically. So that's all we wanted to put up.
I agree with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Good morning, members. We're from California Society of Periodontists, and certainly would like to, my name is Kevin Chen. This is my colleague, Dr. Jakowski. We have had conversation in the past with Dr. Witcher, specifically to this conscious sedation permit increase. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Because we're receiving a lot of phone calls from members and expressing concern, although it's in effect, but it's increased significantly from what's in the past. And so we'd like to hear from the board.
I'll take that. And Sarah, please if you have anything to add, or Karen, or any other staff. The exact figure by our consultant for the cost of staff time involved in giving that exam was, I think, $39.89. It was just a shade under $4,000. We've been providing that service for many years at a substantial loss. And the reason it's such an expensive service to provide is we basically have at least one program analyst that's a fairly high-level person, one of our best people running that program, and it's, I think, at least half-time and often full-time for her to coordinate that. To organize an on-site inspection and evaluation can take up to 10 to 12 phone calls, getting 2 doctors, a patient, 2 evaluators, or an evaluator, all there at the same time. And there's a lot of last-minute cancellations and a lot of delays in getting it done. The other aspect of it is it only occurs every 6 years for conscious sedation. For general anesthesia, it's 5. And so you got to look at it. Most of the renewal fees renew every 2 years. This one's every 6. So it occurs, a third as often. So you got to calculate that in. And so those are the factors that drive the cost of that program. The thing that I think a lot of licensees don't understand is, first of all, we're a special fund agency. We don't get any money from anywhere other than your fees. And we tried, I was on this budget subcommittee that looked at the fee increase. We tried to distribute that fairly across the board. Those individuals who are licensing renewals and things that are fairly inexpensive to process, those fees were kept low. People were entering the workforce, new graduates, things like that. We wanted to keep those fees low. For people who are more established and have been around, specialists, things like that, people coming in under licensure by credential, we thought they could probably afford a little bit more and it wouldn't be an undue financial hardship. So the problem is we only have a few places we can get revenue. The other thing you need to understand is we have to support the enforcement program. That's about 80% of our budget, and that's kind of spread across the entire spectrum of licensees. So that's kind of our fixed overhead. And so that's why the numbers are as large as they are, because we have no other way of supporting enforcement. And I know when I look at my own fees and how I do things, I try to think, well, what is this costing me on a daily or annual basis? And if you figure that the cost of that $2,000 evaluation is about $330 a year, that's less than most people charge for one case. So not to make decisions for people about what they can and cannot afford, but I'm just saying that given the level of service and what's being done, that we thought about this. It was not an arbitrary decision, and I pay that fee. I was reluctant, and I pay it every 5 years, so I was reluctant to see it go through because I knew I'd hear from my own people. But still, it's just as one commenter. We received very few comments on this when we were going through rulemaking, and one comment was that part of the price of doing business. So, yeah.
Does this include oral sedation also?
No. Oral sedation does not undergo an office anesthesia evaluation. However, if you want to have the IV conscious sedation permit as it is now, you must undergo the office inspection and evaluation every 6 years.
Are there any plans to add the fees of oral sedation or increase those?
Well, I believe the permit fee was increased some.
Okay. Have you guys thought about the possibility of the law of unintended consequences with raising the fees like this?
Of course.
I know it's going to increase the revenue a lot, but have you estimated how many dentists will stop providing the service for their patients because they can't afford it in the current environment?
Well, as I mentioned, the fee is less than one case per year, the revenue generated than one case per year. And I think it's a little disingenuous to say that people are going to stop providing the service because they can't afford it. I think what might be more accurate is to say they don't want to pay it, they don't use the service enough to justify the cost.
I very strongly disagree. I just sold my practice. I'm semi-retired, that's why I can be here today. And I live in Davis, and I've never been to one of these meetings before, but the guy I sold my practice to has got so much debt, and he just went through this, you know, with getting conscious sedation, and he's being squeezed in ways I never even dreamed of. You know, as mature practitioners, we're not looking at it like these guys come out of school, because I volunteer at UCSF and I see the debt these guys have. You know, I'm glad I'm on this side of the practice continuum, but looking at what these guys are going through just out of school, I think it's disingenuous to say that, oh, it's just one case. These guys have so much debt and so much competition now. But that's just my opinion.
I understand that, particularly in the specialty of periodontics, there has been a lot of concern about this, and we appreciate that.
And I'm looking at more of a like public safety, because this service is so good for our patients. You know, it keeps the blood pressure down, you have a lifeline in, there's so many good things, and so many patients that really would not be getting treatment are coming in. So I think on a couple issues, this is a public safety issue.
Well, we appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Richard? I just want to, are we on or not? The light isn't on. Anyway, I just wanted to make a comment regarding the application for licensure by residency from going from $100 to $800, 800% increase. This is obviously an individual in most cases who has just recently graduated from dental school, and it seems to be a fairly large increase for us encouraging, let's say, a licensure without a clinical examination. And that's one of the issues that I think the dental profession and ADA and other organizations are looking at now, and that is less of clinical examinations to get licensure and more recognizable, a lot of reciprocity. Talking about the squeezes that an individual has, that has financial squeezes, that have just recently graduated from dental school, might be purchasing a practice. If they came in with a residency license as compared to what it would cost if they were going through like the REB examination process, it seems to be a large increase. Also, the application for a special permit going from $300 to $1,000. Special permits are very limited as far as numbers are concerned, and I can see that the length of time involved in processing those applications for such a few number of them isn't spread out over a larger population. But in most cases, that fee is on the burden of the institution that is hiring the faculty member who is seeking a special permit. So speaking for the educational community in the state, that's a fee going to the dental schools more than it is to the individual.
Speaking as a member of the former subcommittee, both those items came to our attention. I think our intent is this is the first time through on this, and there will be some adjustment necessary. And I think our executive officer made the comment that we're going to see how this goes for a little bit and perhaps adjust up or down depending on, you know, what is needed to meet our projections. So I think, thank you for bringing those up. I sort of agree with you. It's just we have to look for an opportunity to make that change.
At this point, I just wanted to comment on the process. Any adjustments that we would make to the fees would have to go through a regulatory process, obviously. And to the folks that were just at the mic, Dr. Chen and Dr. Schenkowski, thank you for coming today. I'd like to encourage you, if you're a member of a society or association, or even individual licensees, to perhaps tune in. Our meetings are webcast regularly. They're archived, so you can go in and look at those. But the process by which we raise the fees is an open process. It allows for public comment, and we heard nothing through the 12 to 18 months that this was going through of comments that you have just made today. So the board is mindful of public protection, and that's absolutely what the board's mission is. So I don't think that, I'm sure they didn't take it personally that you would question that this was necessarily a public protection issue. though the board does need to maintain its fees in order to conduct the other business of the board, which is licensing and disciplining its members. So I'd encourage you to continue to watch what we're doing at our board meetings, and if possible, congratulations on your retirement, Dr. I hope now maybe perhaps you can come to the meetings more often, especially when they're in Sacramento. We do encourage societies and associations to participate in our process. So thank you for coming.
I didn't even know about this fee increase till last week when Kevin called me, and nobody, this was totally off our radar, but, and so we missed it. But, governments tend to tax things they want to decrease, such as smoking, with huge taxes. I just want you to think about that with this huge increase in sedation, because it is such a vital help for our patients. Thank you.
Dr. Witcher, I have one other question. Maybe you could help me with this one. On page 3 of our fee increase listings, just a little bit below the center is an application for oral and maxillofacial surgery. What? Surgery permit? What is that?
That's for people who have a medical degree but not a dental degree, but they want a dental license number, usually for insurance billing, so they can bill dental
I
insurance.
thought that's probably what it was, but it was not clear what it was for.
It's a little-known secret. Okay, if there's no other questions or comments on this, we're going to convene the joint meeting of the Dental Assisting Council and the Dental Board. Before we do that, we did have an agenda item hand-carried to the meeting, agenda item number 7. That's discussion and possible action regarding subcommittee's recommendation relating to alternative method to measure RDA competency for licensure. We're going to give everybody 10 or 15 minutes to read that over, because unfortunately we were not able to get that into the meeting packet in time. We held a workshop very recently in Sacramento and had to have a conference call, and it was just hard to put that together in time to get this out in a more timely fashion, so my apologies, but we'll allow everybody a few minutes to read this over. And I would really kind of like to direct your attention to page 2, alternative number 5, and just read that part over. The other part we have pretty well covered, and so, I mean, we'll go through that during the meeting when we get to this item, but just look at alternative 5, completion of the new board-approved course in RDA clinical duties, because that's a new alternative that was not previously discussed. Thank you. So we'll take 10 minutes and come back here by 10:30. Time break there to read over. I'd like to go ahead and reconvene the meeting, everyone. We'll go ahead and convene the meeting, the joint meeting of the Dental Board and the Dental Assisting Council. We'll start off with a roll call.
Here we go. Burton? Here. I don't think this is it. Okay, Burton Chan.
Yes.
Forsythe.
Here.
Lai.
Yes.
Lay.
Here.
Mackenzie.
Here.
Medina. Morrow.
Here.
Stewart.
Yes.
Witcher.
Here.
We have quorum.
Would council members please call the roll?
Contreras. Davis Washington. Here. Rodriguez. Here.
Okay, thank you. Next, I'd like a motion to approve the August 10th joint meeting minutes.
Move to approve.
Okay.
Who?
Do I have a second?
Who said?
Judy and Yvette. Okay, any corrections? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and call the roll to approve. Oh, is there
Okay.
any public comment on the meeting minutes? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and call the roll to approve the minutes.
Okay, Burton,
Yes.
Chan,
Yes.
Forsythe,
Yes.
Lai,
Yes.
Lay,
Yes.
McKenzie, Medina, Morrow,
Yes.
Stewart,
Yes.
Witcher,
Yes.
Davis Washington. Rodriguez.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go ahead and take up number 4, staff update on the program.
Good morning, Sarah Wallace, Assistant Executive Officer and Manager of the Dental Assisting Program. Just have a couple of brief updates to share today. I wanted to share that we've been working with the Department of Consumer Affairs to establish a manager position over the Dental Assisting Program. And to do so would require putting through a budget change proposal in the near future. But to do that, you have to have the workload and the justification necessary to sustain the position. To do that, we got the approval for a 2-year limited term position for Staff Services Manager 1, and we are currently going through that recruitment process. I'm hopeful that we'll have a new manager here shortly on board. Additionally, board staff have been working diligently on the licensure of RDAs and making sure that we're kept up to date. We are about 3 shelves away from an entire overhaul and cleaning of our file room right now. So we've got several boxes going over to State Records Center. I wanted to commend staff. They've been very organized and very diligent and working a lot of overtime to try to make sure that we get this process done and that folks are getting licensed as efficiently as possible. Additionally, we just administered 2 registered dental assistant extended functions examinations, one at UCSF and one at UCLA in early October, and those both proved to be successful. So we have just posted the 2018 RDA-EF examination schedule, so our next examination will be at the end of January at UCSF. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I think Karen will cover some of the staff vacancies and so on in her report, but where are we overall in terms of our manpower in the dental assisting unit?
In dental assisting unit, right now, we are down 3 staff folks. So I have Leslie Compaz, who was an associate governmental program analyst, left the board in August for a promotional opportunity at another agency, so we're very proud of her. But with that, we've had to shift gears on the development of the regulatory proposal, and Allison has been working closely with me along with the other 2 leads in the dental assisting unit. We've had 1 management services technician vacancy for a while. We've been working with personnel on the recruitment and filling that. And then just this last week, the other management services technician took a promotional opportunity within the board, so at least we didn't lose the knowledge, and she's still available to help when needed. But we seem to be able to sustain it so far, and luckily, this period of time in the year, it's a little bit slower for us. So right now, I don't have any worries. That recruitment to fill those 2 MSTs and the 1 AGPA are underway. So I'm confident by the new year, we should have folks in place and we'll be fully staffed again.
Who is currently reviewing applications?
Laura Fisher is our lead. She's our educational coordinator. She's been on with us for, well, in this capacity for about a year, but she's been with the board for 10 years plus. So she has a lot of institutional knowledge that she's able to share. We're also going through a recruitment of subject matter experts right now and a SME training so that we can beef up our evaluation program and course and curriculum review.
It's too bad to lose Leslie. She was
I
an
know.
asset.
It was, but she had a great opportunity, and so I'm very
It
proud of her
happens.
for doing that.
Any questions from board members about the program? Okay, why don't you continue?
I think we may have skipped agenda item 3, so if you don't mind, if we go back to that. Update on dental assisting program and course applications. This is a standard agenda item that we share. I know that at the last meeting, some questions came about of what trends we were seeing, and so I had asked staff to further develop this memorandum, and so you'll see tables that indicate the number of applications that have been approved this year, as well as a listing of those providers by name, and then an overall total number of approved dental assisting programs and courses. On the last page, though, you'll see a table and a pie chart. So what we've found is that the orthodontic assistant permit course seems to be the most popular course, and the majority of the applications we receive are pertaining to that course curriculum.
Okay. Are you also going to handle the update on exam statistics?
Yes.
Thank you.
So moving on to agenda item 5. We've included our standard agenda item relating to the dental assisting examination statistics. Of all candidates we've tested over the last year, we've included written examination statistics for the RDA, RDA-EF, OA, DSA, as well as the law and ethics for the RDA examination, as well as statistics regarding the RDA-EF clinical and practical examinations. I did receive a phone call from a program director this week that was concerned that perhaps her statistics were not 100% accurate and that it may have been reflecting an additional student. So if any program directors have any concerns, please let me know and we'll verify the accuracy of the information. But this information is pulled directly from our BREEZE program in order to provide our statistics.
Yeah, when you have 2 students take it and 1 fails, that doesn't help your pass rate.
Right.
Any questions?
No question.
Seeing none, we'll go ahead and review dental assisting licensing statistics.
Again, another standard agenda item to share the overall licensing statistics that we've had pulling from our BREEZE system. Again, it appears to be accurate from everything that we've been able to tell, but if there's any inaccuracies that anybody sees, please let us know. I know that a question came about at the last meeting regarding the delinquencies, and so staff is still in the process of developing a report. We have a preliminary report of all licensing types that indicates the predominant or the bulk of our delinquencies lie in the 1 to 2 year mark of delinquency.
Yeah, I know that was a question some had. I think we've sort of determined that it's not that out of line.
It's not in comparison with other boards and bureaus within DCA. It's something that we all deal with, and so of course they have the opportunity to be delinquent for 5 years, and once they meet that 5-year mark, it'll become canceled and would then have to reapply for licensure to the board.
Well, we see a lot of people coming back and applying for a new license. And I think we can see why people are stopping out of the workplace, family members, change of job, change of location, all of the different reasons. And when you have a licensing population of over 25,000, you're just gonna have some big numbers in delinquencies, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah. Good. Okay, moving along. I'm sorry.
Just have a comment and
Yeah.
maybe a question.
Mm-hmm.
The data that, Sarah, that you presented to us for the dental assisting by county, RDAs by county, and the population of that county, and the population assistant per population.
Yes.
Do we have any, or would it be helpful if we had some data regarding the number of RDAs per licensed dentist? Because the RDA cannot serve the population without having a dentist to supervise them. So the number of people per RDA is information, but it really isn't functional information from a standpoint of how many RDAs do we have per dentist.
Okay, so provide data regarding the number of RDAs per licensed dentist broken out by
Per
county.
county.
Okay.
Right, thank you.
You could do a rough calculation if you look in LCP, because the number of dentists per county are set forth there, so just, if you got a county, just divide one into the other and you'd have the ratio. But we could, it might be nice to have that, as you suggested, provided just across the board so you could scan it.
I'll see what we can do.
Also, I've had conversations with Heidi in OPES about perhaps asking this question when we start our occupational analysis for dentistry, to try to get a feeling for how many unregistered dental assistants there are out there working for dentists, as well as the number of EFs they utilize and RDAs they utilize. So this might be something that we could, some data that we could try to capture through doing our occupational analysis.
Well, maybe this is not the appropriate time to mention this, and I'm sure our legal counsel will tell me not to say it if I shouldn't have said it. Maybe it's time that we looked at a requirement for unlicensed dental assistants to at least register with the board, so that we know how many are out there. Now, should I have said that or not?
You can say, you just can't discuss the.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to itemize that for a discussion at a future meeting.
It's interesting because another Department of Health agency just underwent a similar addition of a category that just involves a background check and fingerprinting. That's the home health care aides, or helpers. Anyway, there's a subcategory there. It was kind of interesting to look at that parallel. So there's precedent for that. Okay. Any public comment on these things we're discussing? I don't want to move through it too quickly to the exclusion of that, of course. Okay, moving on then to number 7.
Would you want to take number 8 first?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, we certainly can, yeah.
It's just a quick update regarding the combining of the RDA written and the law and ethics examinations. We're still on target for the May 2018 release. The Office of Professional Examination Services has released the written exam plan. It is available on our website and available to any public parties that are interested in reading through that. We're on target as far as we know with all of our workshops coming up, and so look for May to see those that be implemented.
Thank you.
So, agenda item 7, we've noted this as discussion of possible action regarding the subcommittee's recommendations relating to alternative methods to measure RDA competency for licensure. As you recall, at the last board meeting in August, the Office of Professional Examination Services came forward with proposed alternatives. At that time, the board had determined that it did not want to seek a practical examination as a form of an alternative, and charged a subcommittee to develop potential alternatives to bring forward at another board meeting. That subcommittee was Dr. Bruce Witcher and Judith Forsythe, registered dental assistant. They convened and developed a draft document with recommendations that was then presented and shared at a stakeholder meeting or a public interested parties workshop that we held in Sacramento on Friday, October 13th at our Solid Training Center. It was attended by members of the DAGGers, the Dental Assisting Educators Group, California Dental Assistant Association, California Dental Association, as well as various licensees. And so the overwhelming consensus at that meeting from the stakeholders was the addition of an alternative to be proposed relating to a standalone course rather than a practical examination that would essentially cover the clinical skills that a registered dental assistant would be tested on during that practical examination. So just for a little bit of background for the board members for the licensure process. The way our standalone courses currently work are we have corona polish as a required course, radiation safety, Pitt and Fisher sealants, the 8-hour infection control, the Dental Practice Act. If a candidate goes through the formal educational pathway, those board-approved RDA programs incorporate all of these individual course curriculum requirements within their program curriculum. If it's an on-the-job trained candidate, they would then go through, have their work experience, and then they would be responsible for completing each of these standalone courses as well prior to being able to apply for licensure. So in essence, what's being proposed is the addition of another course at this time. So I apologize, we just finished the memorandum at 8:30 this morning. And so it was passed out and distributed, and I believe you've all had an opportunity to read it. So at this time, I'd like to hand it over to the subcommittee to share your recommendations, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about the program or any background. We also have representatives from the Office of Professional Examination Services as well, here to speak to any issues that come up.
Thank you. Judy and I will offer comments. I'll lead off. We're basically co-chairing this subcommittee. Much of the information here we covered at the last meeting, which had to do with various alternatives to the practical exam. Nevertheless, I've carried that discussion forward so everybody sees that we did consider alternatives, including a practical exam, and went over reasons why or why not we could do that, and then made a recommendation for each one. And you'll see those listed starting on page 1, alternative methods. So number 1 was practical exam, which we basically determined at our last meeting that we were unable to accomplish. Similarly, practical administered by an outside entity such as REB, because we felt the same difficulties would be encountered, and that would potentially be given at greater cost. If the board gives the course, it's usually given at a somewhat subsidized rate, as opposed to somebody who has to bring in the necessary expertise, manpower. One of the real big challenges with these exams is that the current thinking in exam administration is you have to have a consistent setting that gives a testing environment across all of your examination sites. This has been a problem for us, and just finding places to give these exams has proven to be a huge challenge. So that alone is a very big hurdle, let alone managing the calibration and maintaining calibration across all your examiners. So that's going to apply just to any practical exam. The OSCE was looked at, the objective structured clinical examination. That is more, it isn't really a task-oriented kind of examination. And, you know, Dr. Morrow knows more about the OSCE than I, but is our exam expert. But it's more geared toward clinical problem solving, cases that are given to you, and you know, basically go over and score on a multiple choice answer sheet, you know, what you're going to do in that given setting. And then, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, that's number 3. Okay, good, thank you for that. So that's the OSCE. And we talked about that a little bit at the last meeting, but provided some additional detail in summary form for you here. The other that was discussed at the last meeting was certification by affidavits completed by the supervising dentist. That was proposed by our representatives from OPES. And, you know, although we examined this, we thought that it wasn't optimal because there were, and I think Dr. Lai and some of the other board members have comments that dentists are highly variable in what they would grant as a certification criteria. We would have the same difficulties with calibration and standardization. I mean, it's just very, very hard to define minimum competency when you have a skill that is learned over time. And at what point do you pick that as being the point at which they achieve minimum competency? So, and then we identified manpower problems related to dentists doing this in what setting in which they would do it. It might not be available to all assistants, and so that we tended not to favor that alternative. The alternative that came out of our workshop, which is the one I wanted everybody to look at, because it really was new. We may have just touched on it at the last meeting, but didn't go into it in any detail. But basically, this was proposed by our stakeholders. I mentioned this too as a possibility myself. The RDA programs favored an additional required board-approved course, such as Sarah described. And what we arrived at is this, since it's an exam replacement, we would look at the same procedures that were tested on the practical exam. And there's some support for that in the RDA occupational analysis, that those are meaningful tasks that are done by RDAs that are appropriate for an exam. So, putting those into a course would be a reasonable thing to do. And as Sarah mentioned, we have other required courses like that. There's kind of a suite of them. And so this is not something new. We would develop educational regs. It would take a statutory change, of course, because the required courses are in statute, and then the educational regs are developed as a companion to those. So there is a process involved. We would have to keep in mind the legislative timetable in planning this out, so we have this thing done before we can no longer offer anything other than the practical exam again in January of 2020. So we have some discussion pro and con of this. I know there was concern primarily that this was necessary for on-the-job trained assistants to assure that they really did get properly trained. The subcommittee reviewed practical examination results, and seeing that the practical exam and written results are similar by pathway, whether it's a formal educational pathway or OJT, we did not feel that supported the need for the course. Then there was a discussion of whether people taking the practical from OJT maybe took a preparatory course, and that helped them score higher. We don't have that information. That our recommendation basically is that we open this up for discussion at this time. And we'll ask our OPES representatives to comment on the discussion. I would like to just call your attention to page 4, in that a required course would need to meet some criteria. And that's listed bullet points 1 through 4 in the mid-paragraph there, and I'll read those. The course should provide evidence that the knowledge and skill acquired in the course extend to RDAs and what they're learning on the job. The course is accessible to candidates and does not create undue hardship. There was a lot of concern that if the course was costly and wasn't given in enough locations, that it could be a barrier to licensure. And then finally, the board must be confident the court actually adds patient protections above and beyond the existing requirements, such as the written and dentist oversight. Because again, as we all know, these are supervised duties that are performed really under either general or direct supervision, depending on what the dentist determines. So I guess, Judy, do you have anything to add to that?
Oh, yeah, thank you, Dr. Witcher. I appreciate it. This subcommittee took this task very seriously. We spent a lot of time debating the different alternatives. And as you can see, there were several different things for us to look at. As we went through the process of elimination and we got down to this last one, the number 5, where it just seems like we need some discussion from the board and have your input. Where I see it is, I just keep asking myself, what are we trying to accomplish? And although I was very attached to the practical exam, and it took me many, many months to separate myself from it and mourn the loss of it, I have come to the conclusion of it's not feasible, it's not going to work, and what else can we do? In looking at all the other alternatives, getting down to this number 5, I'm still struggling. I'm struggling with the piece of it of if we couldn't calibrate our examiners to give a fair and just exam, how can we have these courses and have instructors being fair and just? So it just doesn't make sense in my mind, so I would love to hear your input, and then, of course, hear from, from OPES and the educators. So where I see it is, we need to stay the course of where we are currently. I would say that we're doing the written exam, and then we'll be combining the written and the law and ethics, so they'll be having both combined. I'm a product of the written exam, RDA. Many years ago, they didn't have the practical exam when I took my licensing, and I did okay. I survived. The patient survived. The first 10 or 20 or maybe even 50 temporaries you make aren't great. By the time you get into 100 and more, you're doing some really good work. It takes time. It takes repetitive. It's a skill that they all have to learn. I'm hoping that they don't just get turned loose on patients from day one and start making temporaries. It's something that you build into. The dentist is responsible. They supervise the RDA, and they need to be helping them to hone their skills. The other dental assistants in the office, that's how I learned. That's how I taught for many years, other assistants. I just think that that's just a natural progression. So with that being said, I guess we could just open it to discussion and let others.
Yeah, just one other comment, and this has been brought up before, but I'll just repeat it, is, we really don't get complaints against RDAs for other things than bad behavior. We've seen a lot of I've been here for 8 years and a little more, and I don't recall having seen a quality of care complaint against an RDA during that time. And OPES in their evaluation of other states was unable to find any evidence of that in other states as well. And so again, what are we trying to achieve here? What's the problem that we're trying to solve? I appreciate we would like all our assistants to roll out of a program and be ready to go and train, but we all know that that's not usually the case, that you're going to have to do a certain amount of retraining to get them to where you want them to be. And the other part you consider is different offices use different techniques. Some don't make temporaries at all, others do, others use different materials, and encompassing the entire spectrum of these tasks as they're done in different offices is going to be quite challenging. It may be that they're irrelevant. For instance, if you need the RDA to go into an ortho practice, you're not going to be using those duties there. So those are just some of the points for discussion, and I think, I'll open it up after that. Dr. Morrow, I think you were first.
First, I want to express my appreciation to the members of the subcommittee and all of the people that were involved in stakeholders and discussions. This is obviously a very extensive and intensive process to look at and to work through. From a standpoint of establishing, in a course of establishing minimum competency, that's a struggle that we have in dental education and have had for years, because CODA requires that we document that our graduates are minimally competent in what we say they're going to be quite competent in. There's obviously a difference between clinical acceptability and clinical ideal. Clinically ideal and clinical acceptable are basically the two ends of the spectrum. We're not expecting dental students to be clinically ideal after 4 years of dental school, nor are we expecting RDAs to be excellent at what they do when they enter into the profession of registered dental assisting. With that said, I think your recommendation or alternative number 5, while it might look on the surface as being a practical application, I think it has a lot of unexpected consequences that are buried within it from a standpoint of calibration and so forth. Obviously, calibration of experienced educators is different than calibration of unexperienced educators. We do a process of calibrating our faculty in dental schools on a regular basis in order for them to be on the same page from a standpoint of assessing competency of the students. And I think faculty members in an RDA program are probably in the same area of what are we looking for and some uniformity. But it is difficult to establish across the board equality from a standpoint of how one person views something and another person views it in a different way. So a course that would be required for graduation from an RDA program that would establish those minimum competencies is almost like a curriculum integrated type of an examination for licensure, like the portfolio examination has been. So it's not ideal, however, it looks like it might be a good solution. The appearance can be deceiving in that situation. From my standpoint of reading these and my involvement in education for as many years as I have been, I think that alternative number 6 is probably the best. And again, we're never gonna find anything that's ideal. We're gonna have to take the best of what we have to choose from and move forward and be aware that corrections down the road will be necessary, because nothing is going to be ideal or perfect. But question, I mean, alternative number 6, in my opinion, is the most operational, let's put it that way, okay? One concern that I have in number 6, however, is that one of the rationale for that one is that these individuals must be, what they do, their product must be supervised and assessed by their dentist that they are working for. However, one of the comments I think that was made in the process here was a discussion about a lack of proper dentist oversight of assistants, and that production pressures does not allow for time for proper checks by dentists. So if we're assuming that the dentists are properly checking everything that the RDA does, maybe we're making an assumption that isn't accurate. If by testimony of workshop participants there is a lack of that supervision, then we have some concerns there from a standpoint that the dentists are doing their job of assisting, of observing and reviewing and checking the work that their RDAs do. Because in this case, we're saying we don't really need to have a practical exam because the dentist is checking everything they do. Question is, are they checking everything they do? That's a concern.
I think Tom was next.
In terms of this process, we were given, 10 or 15 minutes this morning to read these pages, and these are difficult issues, and my question was trying to understand while we were discussing 1 through 5, and I saw alternative number 6, I'm going, why are we saving that one? I'm just trying to understand how we're supposed to be approaching this conversation. Is 6 the best thing that you think that we should do moving forward? I guess I'm addressing that to the subcommittee.
Let me respond to that. I think that 1 through 4 were addressed at the prior meeting. I think 5 and 6 is what we're really looking at. So that's why I directed everybody's attention to number 5 on page 2, starting there. So I think that's where we need to focus.
And then obviously my comments jumped to number 6, so.
Well, you're a fast
If
reader.
I was out of order, I apologize.
You read fast. I'm sorry, Meredith, were you next?
Yeah, so I think I echo some of what at least Dr. Morrow said, just actually also talking about 5 and 6. I'll sort of take both of them a little bit together. So there was the comment with respect to 5 that you have the calibration issue, and absolutely, but as Dr. Morrow said, that's always going to be an issue. I mean, it's an issue with dental schools, it's an issue everywhere. It does seem like the calibration issue should still be better with a program, or at least in my mind, it should be better if you require a certain class rather than a test where there can be more variability from day to day. The individuals, I think, administering the test, it seemed like there was more, change of those individuals, and obviously we saw a big difference in North and South, where I think it can be calibrated a little bit better if you're dealing with education programs. So I don't want the fact that there is calibration potential issues to pretty much say we just don't do it because it's a hard problem, because it is a hard problem and we already deal with that everywhere. I think I also have the thought that even if the RDA is not going to do all of these types of things in the first practice that they go to, they might do it in subsequent practices. And I would, in the same way, dentists, probably the same type of thing, right? There's things that I assume you get schooled on that you don't necessarily do. So I would, from a patient standpoint, I would at least want some minimum level of assumption of competence and capability, with, of course, the assumption that the dentist is still ultimately responsible, which I guess then brings me to number 6, where I still, I guess I don't really even understand what alternative 6 is, because to me that seems like that's theoretically what we already have, is that the dentist is supposed to supervise.
I would call that in the vernacular, the no action alternative.
Okay, I mean,
Yeah.
that's the way I view it, because I'm like, isn't that what they're supposed to be doing anyway? And, to me, it doesn't add anything. So I think there was some comment in there, and I can't remember if it was OPES or who, that there are concerns that the dentist, some dentists, not everyone, but may not be supervising. And so now you're basically saying, well, that's okay. So, I mean, because if you're talking calibration issues, now you have the whole pool of dentists, which of course are responsible for patients, but I just don't see how that's any different than what we currently have.
That is what we're currently doing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bruce, can I just add? So Meredith, what you're talking about the programs, but in addition to the programs, we also have the OJTs and then the non-board approved programs. So there would be a standalone course. So there would be probably hundreds of those potentially, in addition to the program. So it's not exclusively just programs. So does that make sense?
Well, yeah, I guess, sort of. I mean, because couldn't it be, I realize that there's other pathways, but couldn't it be in a program and you just say, like, everyone doesn't have to come in that way, but they're the ones that can administer it?
Well, there would be standalones, similar to.
Well, there doesn't have to be, right? Maybe there does, I don't know.
There does, because we do have to have it that way. Because if you're on-the-job trained, you did go to a program, so you would have to go to a course. Who's teaching that course?
Right, but I guess my assumption is, the program could accept those students who are on the job trained just for that one course.
We can, I think there's just a little confusion about how all this works, but,
I'm sure that, yeah,
but I think your point is, at least there would be a formal course with a curriculum, with instructors. That would be preferable to having the exam, which is one shot, calibration
Right.
issues with examiners coming in from all over.
Right.
And difficulty with performance in that circumstance, whereas this is given over a course of time. So that's fine. Dr. Lay.
Yes, well, again, I just want to thank the subcommittee and also OPES for a very careful and thoughtful recommendations to us. As I was reading this, I totally agree, with OPES analysis. I understand that there's always that issue between the OJT and the CODA-approved graduates. And I can tell you that I have probably hired over 100 RDAs in my lifetime by now. At this time, I have over 20 RDAs working under me and a few OJT, dental assistants. In the last year, I'm also involved with a CODA-approved dental assistant course, program. And as I'm reading the report, 57% of the CODA-approved dental assistant program that I'm involved with passed the written exam to become RDA. 100% of my OJT dental assistants passed the exam in the last year. So what does that tell you? So I do think that, there's really not that much difference between attending a CODA-approved course or OJT. The OJT dental assistants do take a little bit more time because they do study very hard. They do prepare themselves, for these exams. And I'm talking about both practical and written exam, and my OJT dental assistants passed those exams the first time. Okay. Number two, the data from the survey that we did earlier in the year indicated that only 5% of the respondents, RDAs, who responded to the survey, stated that they only performed the RDA functions that we're testing on the exam. Only 5% of the time that they actually performed those functions. And so if you go back to the survey, those respondents said that after all these tests, they only performed the temporary crowns 5% of that office time. So what are we testing? We're testing a procedure that's only performed 5% in their practice. So is that a true test? Is that really something we want to test? How is that protecting the public? So I think that's something, and that's why I appreciate OPS, for actually, going through this process to show that, we're not really testing the right things. So the public isn't protected by the practical exam. And also another, so basically, when you're looking at, if you really think about, why they're only performing 5% of the time doing, the temporary crowns, think about it, the practice has changed. There's modern technology now where the dentist can actually do the crowns and cement the crowns within an hour or so on same day when they get. So there may not be the need for that temporary crown to be performed anymore. I know there are practices that are still doing it, using the lab, like myself. So my RDAs still have to do the temps. But there are many practices out there that I know that have these machines that would do the crowns. They don't need the RDAs to be doing temps. So that may be one of the reasons why they're only doing 5% of their practice time, doing the procedure, the very procedure that we're testing. So again, I do agree with the subcommittee recommendation. I agree with OPS, and I really appreciate your work, and your very thoughtfulness in bringing the recommendation to us.
Thank you. Dr. Lott.
Thank you for those comments. I agree with that, what you were saying, is I think we need to have a standard, though, on the side of a practicing dentist. So as I have two hats here, being on the board and having an idea that we need to do something that will facilitate more RDAs and make sure they're competent. But on the other side, as a dentist hiring an RDA or a dentist hiring a on-the-job trained, how do you distinguish the two? If they're board certified RDA, they have a different level at the beginning as I hire them as a dentist. With the insurance that the board has vetted them as being minimally competent in what they do. And so as a dentist or somebody that's trying to hire somebody, I have a kind of guarantee, a somewhat guarantee that they're going to be competent. Whereas if I get someone off by referral, or this person, she's taken radiation, but she hasn't finished her courses, can you hire her? So based on that, you don't really even know how much to compensate. So there's always, I guess, if we look at RDA, there's a certain salary. So where do we start? Where do we go? So with that, as a hiring dentist, what do I have my basis? What do I base their compensation? What do I base their competency? And so on that side, I have an issue with what we're talking about here.
Well, in my experience, when I hire a new RDA, I look at them as a DA.
As
I
a
don't
DO.
trust any of them being as competent as
Okay.
anybody else. Practice makes perfect.
But you're
As
special.
Judy said.
You're special. See, there's a lot of dentists that say,
I'm sorry.
oh,
but
you're an
again,
RDA.
I do not
Oh,
agree,
okay.
I do not agree that anyone who graduated from a CODA-approved, passed the exam, is any better than my OJT dental assistants who passed the exam. I can tell you that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have had so many OJT dental assistants, I have hired many CODA-approved graduates, and I can tell you there isn't a difference. RNs, LVNs, MAs, they go through the certification course in order to do certain procedures within their scope. They don't take any practical exam. It's a certification course, which is what we have with corner polish, with sealants, with all that. The RDAs who passed the exam years ago didn't have sealant, because that was part of dental hygiene, functions. They all went through the sealing course, become certified, they're now doing that. We never had a practical exam on sealant. So for us to say that somehow, only the new RDAs who actually took sealant during their course or their program are better than those that passed the RDA exam years ago and took the certification of sealant, I don't think that's true. And so I think, the point I'm trying to make is that those courses, the extra courses that are being recommended, will not test any competency of any of these candidates, and they're not good. It's not an added value, and it doesn't protect the public. That's all I'm saying.
Fran?
I've heard you say this before. So I want to understand, if you hire someone, what do you look for? How do you determine that that person is a fit?
Right now, well, in San Francisco, we have a big workforce problem. And so, how does one find a qualified dental assistant? Usually it's by referral from a temporary agency. And then, secondly, it used to be where we put an ad in the paper. We don't do that anymore. It's all by email. So you go Craigslist, you go to different finders. There really isn't really a headhunter for assistants. And so you get a bunch of emails, and right off the bat, you can see what their qualifications are. One, if they've had certain qualifications like X-ray license, some have coronal polish, some have experience in a specialty practice. And so you kind of weed it all out that way, what would fit. And then you ask for them to come in for an interview, maybe a working interview, and look at references. And so at that point, you have a fair idea if the person's gonna fit into the practice, if they show up on time or if they show up at all. We have these issues as dentists looking for somebody that will be part of your team, not just somebody to help you, mix your alginate or suction or, clean up the office after. It's a whole package. They have to be part of your family, part of your philosophy, how you are gonna treat your patients, which is how I pick.
But in that working interview, where the person is responsible for completing certain tasks,
Yes.
how do you measure whether or not the competency with which they perform those tasks?
Okay. the working interview is very important. One, being able to communicate, to see if they know how to clean up the lab, see if they know how to clean up the room, see if they know what you're talking about. Some people say, oh, I've had experience for 25 years in dental assisting, but only for an endodontist or only for a surgeon. As a cosmetic dentist or as a restorative dentist or as a periodontist is totally different. So each time you hire somebody, you have to see if they're qualified to do that and see if they have bad habits or good habits they've learned from the previous doctors. And then you look at the resume, if they've been with 10 different doctors in the last 3 years, you're in trouble. So you asked me how difficult it is to hire somebody or how they fit into my practice. Each person is totally different. Each one has a gift. And if you can find it, and some don't. Some just say, you know, I don't care, I'm doing my 9 to 5, I'm out of here. And there's some that will work through lunch, there's some that work late, some will come in early, some will come in on Saturdays or Sundays just because you need them to come in. It's totally different. And so, how do we, getting back to your question, how do you hire somebody? What attributes is you have to do each one independently, one at a time.
At this point, this is really good. I'd really like to hear from our council members.
I feel like we're getting a little off topic here, but I do kind of want to address what you're saying. Value who you have, you know. I think dentists who have an RDA that comes to them and says, I need $1 extra, doctor, and they say no, they're gonna lose that. And if you've invested time in this person, give them the $1. You know, it's valuing your assistance and starting at the bottom. Like if you're looking for somebody, I think, you know, if you want somebody who has that experience, you're gonna recruit for somebody who has experience. Question them. You know, once I was hired, I was a 5-year veteran, but I came from an office where the doctor did everything. So my next job, you know, his first question is, do you make temporary crowns? I don't, very little experience. Okay, that's okay. He took me in his wing and really helped me with that. He knew that from the interview. So I just think dentists, to have that expectation that an assistant's gonna come out just ready to rock and roll and go is really, it's not gonna happen. And it's gonna, you know, you want someone inexperienced, you're gonna pay them low scale. If you want someone experienced, I'm a 20-year veteran. A lot of my friends are still in the dental assisting community, still working. And one thing we see is there's lack of that value of that experienced assistant and that seasoned assistant. So I know I'm getting off topic again, but I think it just lies in the dentist's hands. And if he or she wants to hire somebody that's ready to rock and roll, they need to be prepared to look for somebody who's got quite a few years of experience, but also ready to compensate them for those years of experience and the knowledge that they bring to the table. Being a younger, you know, RDA right out of school, I have an interesting experience. I was an dental assisting instructor, then I went back into the field. I actually hired one of my assistants, assisting students. I taught her how to make provisional crowns, thought I was, you know, we did a great job at our school. And I see her first temporary crown, and I was very disappointed in it. And so, you know, again, just took her again under my wing. The doctors and I just really worked with her to get her provisional crowns to where they need to be. So, again, she was fresh out of school when we hired her. So anyway, I know this is a little off subject, but I just felt like I kind of wanted to address what you were bringing up.
Well, I agree with you. I agree that people should be compensated, but I also have RDAs that apply for the job that are so off base. You know, they want the same scale, pay scale as an EF or above coming out of school. Now, how am I supposed to justify that huge salary if they just got out of school and
Yeah.
and they're taught from the schools that this is what you should be getting. Now, that's the issue as from a dentist standpoint of how am I supposed to equate that?
Right.
If I may jump in, I'd like to bring this around. Jennifer, could you comment on how you view a required course that would be focused on the 3 duties? I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, just give me your
Sure.
thoughts and your impression if you could.
I guess one question I had, and again, I was trying to speed read, and I'm someone who needs to kind of read with quiet, and but I was trying to speed read. I guess one question I was asking is, so if you've gone through the RDA program, you wouldn't need to take this standalone course. Is that correct?
It would be incorporated into the RDA
In the
program
RDA
as the
program.
other required courses
Mhm.
are. In fact, if you complete
Sure.
the RDA program, or in some places, if you don't, you'll get your X-ray certificate. You'll get
Sure.
a certificate showing you did your infection control.
So they would actually receive a certificate saying certified and provisional.
That would be an option, but if you finish the program, the assumption would be they did it. But we would have that built into their curriculum, so the
Mhm.
course would be given outside as a standalone course or within a program, same curriculum requirements.
I again think it comes down to what are we trying to achieve? And I think we've heard this several times here, and I too was heartbroken over the lack of the practical examination. It was, very difficult, but really, the experience comes from repetitive, doing it over and over. And the only way that that's gonna happen is on a patient in the office with the doctor checking their work. And, making it on a typodont, again, being an instructor, so unrealistic and not real. What I want to see my students doing, or when I was teaching, is when we talk about safety, is, how are they holding that Explorer? Are they fulcruming? Are they, those things are super important, and that's going to happen in their class, in their core studies. Where hopefully the teachers are watching them. I really feel like at some point, a lot of direction and a lot of energy needs to be put on the schools. I feel like the schools are just too many variables in these RDA programs that are out there, and I think there needs to be a little bit more, I don't know, continued, evaluation of their curriculum, courses required for the instructors of these schools. But I really feel like we need to really focus on that, because there's a lot of wonderful RDA programs out there, I'm sure, but I think there are a lot also that are charging a lot of money to go to school, but having below minimum competency for these students when they're coming out. So I think having it within the program, I think as it stands is great. What we would do about the on-job training, I feel like they should be able to also have learned that from the dentist or the doctor that they worked from. Hopefully they are in a general practice. And then as far as number 6, I'm a little confused if we're considering that or not, but I would really, would not want to consider that because, if you've got somebody who's working in a perio office, pedo office, there's no way they're going to be able to make a temporary crown. So I hope we're not considering that, number 6.
Just to clarify, alternative 6 would be to complete the written exam and the required courses. And if they're going by OJT, there would not be a course teaching the 3 duties that were previously tested. That would be the difference.
Okay, so this isn't like the dentist signing off on an
No,
RDA?
it is not a
Okay.
dentist sign
Okay.
off, no.
The other
We
thing,
discounted that.
I just wondered if we had thought about increasing, or if it's an option, so if they have, it's just increasing the hours, basically. So if you have completed an RDA program, increasing the externship hours, because those externship hours are part of the training, and so an extern site who takes on an extern is supposed to know that they're there to help guide and continue the education of that student. So I don't know, maybe an option to increase those externship hours.
Well, that would be part of a different discussion,
Okay.
but we'll certainly
Yeah.
entertain that. Before I move on to additional board member comments, I'd like to ask our other council member, Pam, did you have any thoughts on this? I mean, you've been in the workplace a long time and have tons of experience.
30-year veteran, but I also, like Judith, did not take a practical. I took a written,
and we had to follow certain guidelines, and I got my RDA that way. But I think for the fact that we think that these students are gonna take the practical and be able to go into our office and do everything 100%, that's not gonna happen. It takes experience. It takes certain guidelines from the dentist that they are working with, as far as experience is concerned, that they have to be shown the correct way. They're taught a certain way in school, and that's fine. But when they go to different dental offices, like it was stated earlier, they're gonna use different materials. The doctor's gonna train them the way they want them to be trained. So to expect them to come out just because they've taken a practical and that they're gonna be 100% and expect to get paid, as Dr. Lai said, a certain amount of money, that is unrealistic. And I think that we set them up thinking that they're gonna come out making tons of money because they're licensed. They still don't have the experience that this dental office wants them to have. They have the experience of working in school, working on a typodont, doing a crown prep for the practical, but they don't have the experience to expect certain things. So as far, just to read over this right now, it's kind of hard for me to say what would be the best, but I didn't take a practical, and I've been working for 30 years. As far as crowns are concerned, like Dr. Alay said, if 5% are only doing certain procedures, maybe they're in a different practice. I'm in a pediatric office. You have some that are in an endo office. You have some that are in a perio office. They're not doing these type of items because it's not needed. Although we do permanent crowns, but we use a CEREC machine. So the RDA is not making the crown. They're doing the temporaries, but they're not making the crowns.
I think Fran was next, and I'm going to try to bring this around so we have time for public comment. Thank you, Pam.
And actually, this is the second part of my original question. I like the comments that both RDAs made about it is the practical experience that you get afterwards. And so then from what I know about number 5, I would be supportive of that. However, I do have a question of OPS. And that question is there a way to tailor a course that will take into consideration different practice settings?
Tracy Montez, Chief Division of Programs and Policy Review with Consumer Affairs. OPS is in my division. Well, you'd have to know all the different practice settings and all the materials and all the techniques that are utilized by the dentist and their preferences, and then that would be incorporated into the course. And that's one of the reasons why we had some concerns and attached some additional narrative to the alternative number 6, is because what we've heard in this discussion this morning is skill. You get some basic education and competency, and then you go out and you practice and you develop your skill. So, and that's great, that's consistent, and that's nice to hear. It's consistent what we heard in the occupational analysis and what we've heard in the workshop and what we're hearing today. So then our question, to the board basically comes down to, if you do institute this course, what is the value that you are adding? What is the necessary component that must be there that outweighs what I'm hearing about this discussion about skill? Because you have a written test that we know we can possibly put some graphs in, some problems that might deal with these. Again, it's knowledge based, but we can complete some more complex types of questions, and then you have your dentist oversight. So you do have hurdles in place, minimum requirements. So again, it's just the question comes up with, what is this course going to do? What is it going to give you? We heard, well,
we look at resumes and certifications. But then we went on to another big discussion about, well, work habits, good habits, attendance, accountability, communication. And that, to me, gets all the way from the course and what those 3 sets of skills. So again, I know I'm kind of going above and beyond the simple question, but I think, again, going back to answer your question, to have that course reflect all those settings and materials, I think would be impossible to do. So then I just would go back again, what is the value added to having this requirement for these individuals?
I think there might be some confusion, but when we're talking about alternative number 6 and number 5, and just listening, so the subcommittee is recommending alternative number 6. I think that little narrative below it is when you read that, maybe you all are getting confused, where it's talking about the dentist checking off the assistant. Am I understanding that right, or am I confusing everybody?
You're right,
Okay,
yeah.
so it's not a written checkoff, that's what the dentist already does. They're already expected to supervise the work of the dental assistant. So this isn't anything new that we're implementing, that's just a statement that was incorporated into there to justify our reasoning for alternative number 6. Does that help?
If I may too, because it does talk about the dentist certifies and things like that, again, it's like you said, it's already what's being done. There's not an implementation
Yeah,
of an
it's not.
assessment.
There would not be a
There's no
separate.
calibration
No.
involved. It's simply, in this current setting, I feel comfortable that the RDA has done this competently and we are releasing the patient.
I think Meredith's been waiting patiently there.
Trying. So I do feel like we're kind of getting a little bit off into the weeds to a certain extent, and trying to take things a little bit extreme. Whatever we implement, whether it were a practical exam or whether it's a course or anything you do, of course, is not going to be, make someone 100% in everything. Obviously, people get experience over time. And you're going to have different things in different offices. And so I guess I'm not viewing this as this person's going to come out as if they have 20 years experience. Like when I graduated law school, I had minimal competency, right? And I certainly know a lot more now than I did then. And it's different. So I don't, at least I'm not trying to expect this will give me that, or that any of these options would give us someone who's experienced as if they've been doing this forever. But I guess I am looking at something, as I said, thinking of consumers, something where there's at least basic skills and basic competency, and understanding different offices are going to have different needs. They're going to have different levels of what they want. I mean, maybe they only want RDAs that have 20 years experience, and that's their choice. There's going to be variability. So I just think we need to keep that in mind, that we're not looking at any option that's going to make someone, skilled as if they've been doing it, for 10, 20 years.
Well, that's the idea behind basic competency. In interest of time, I'd like to give our stakeholders an opportunity to.
Hello, Melody Randolph. I represent the Dental Assisting Educators Group, and
Melody, your mic's not on.
thank you. Melody Randolph, representing Dental Assisting Educators Group, and I'm the program coordinator for the Sacramento City College Dental Assisting Program. And I too would like to kind of bring this back to the key issues. First of all, to address what Meredith just said there and emphasize that, again, this is true of dentists in dental school, hygienists and hygiene programs, everybody. We learn our skills to a minimum competence. The dental board requires in our applications to become an RDA approved program that we teach our students to a minimum competency. That is an assumed and an expected requirement, that they learn how to do the RDA skills to this minimum competency, not to be perfect, not to be a 20-year veteran of doing this, but to have some kind of basis of skill so that we know where the starting point is. Second issue, the calibration issue, again, we have chronopolish classes, we have x-ray classes, we have sealant classes, we have the dental schools, hygiene programs. Calibration is fundamental to everything we do in every course, so it's not unique to this temporary crown class. So as we're talking about calibration of the faculty, you can't separate out that this temporary crown class calibration is unique to calibrating chronopolish or x-ray or anything else that we do. It doesn't make any sense that we're saying we have these issues here in this one area, but we're not talking about them in other areas. So should we also talk about getting rid of chronopolish and getting rid of x-ray and getting rid of sealants and getting rid of CPR certification because there's no calibration? That doesn't make any sense to separate out this one issue from the other certification requirements. And then dentist supervision. I'd like to challenge all dentists in this room to reflect on your own program, your own office, and whether or not you 100% of the time check all of your RDA skills. Every time your RDA does something that is an RDA skill, that you check that patient before they leave. I would beg to differ if you say you do every single time. It doesn't happen. And to address the being trained 20 or 30 years ago and only taking a written exam, 20 or 30 years ago, the majority of the offices out there were privately owned offices with 1 or 2 doctors in there where they did oversee their assistants much more closely. Now the trend in dentistry is the big practices with multiple doctors that are employee doctors and 20 or 30 assistants. I have a doctor on my advisory board that has 80 people in their huge practice, and he even admits that though he'd like to think that all of his associate dentists oversee and train and watch their RDAs, the fact is they don't. They can't and be in practice. When we go out and check our students on externship, our students are doing procedures that on externship that the doctors aren't necessarily watching and overseeing because they're being left to the other RDAs in the practice to oversee. So that is a fallacy and a huge, and OPS is relying on the fact that, you know, we're putting our hat on the calibration issue and the dentist supervision issue, which I agree with Dr. Morrow, is, you know, he questioned whether or not it's happening. I'm here to tell you it's not happening. Dentists don't 100% of the time, I'd like to even say 50% of the time, oversee their RDAs and check their procedures before the patient is left. And lastly, half a statement on the money issue. RDAs go through our program, and I like to say that our program is one of the hardest programs in the state. And they go through blood, sweat, and tears through the entire program to get out and barely make more than minimum wage. So to say that we're telling our assistants to go out there and ask for $1 million is ridiculous. We're going up to $15 an hour. You know, minimum wage is raising to $15 an hour. Our assistants aren't even getting that when they come out of school. So to say that they're asking unrealistic amounts of money for the skill and training and knowledge that they have is really, really frustrating.
Kara Miyazaki, Foothill College and Dental Assisting Educators Group. I understand the need to avoid barriers to licensure. I totally am sympathetic to that and understand that. But OPS says that they need a convincing argument in order to have something like a separate certification course that's standalone. And my 2 arguments for that is, one, and I've asked this at the stakeholders meeting too as well, is if the RDA practical results were if the RDA practical exam was deemed invalid, then why are we using those statistics to base our decisions on? And the problem with the statistics also is that they're skewed because those OJTs that take the RDA practical exam, many of them take a weekend course to practice those procedures. And I can testify to that because I work for a company and we taught that 4 times a year to 50 to 70 students, OJTs, a week before the exam. And that was just one company. And there's other companies that are doing that as well. as well too. So the pass rate for the OJTs could be raised solely because they took a review course and paid to take that course. And I can tell you that these students they are approved to take the RDA practical exam because they've done their corona polishing and they've done the other courses and the x-ray. And we have 50 to 70 per weekend, and I taught in every single one of those courses. And the skill set was very, it varied widely, I can just say that. And sometimes it took 8 hours for someone to actually learn how to trim a temporary crown appropriately. So that's one of my arguments. And the other argument is so we need a convincing argument to keep something like maybe a standalone course. And CODA and the dental board requires the RDA programs to teach the didactic, lab, preclinical on a typodont, and then go to clinical. So if that's something that's required by the Commission on Dental Accreditation and by the dental board educational programs, why is it going to be different for the on-the-job train? And we're not sure that every dentist has a typodont, and if they go directly to a patient, that just seems to be like a double standard for educational programs or for on-the-job training. The other thing I want to say also is I went to school a long time ago, and I took a practical exam, but we have to all understand that the students, the millennials these days, are very different, and they have a different way of learning, and they have a lot of distractions, and I just wanted to let you know that educating millennials is kind of a different animal versus when I went to school and everyone lived with their parents and their parents paid for their tuition. Now they're the parents, or they're very young and sometimes not that mature.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Can I ask a clarifying question for the?
Yes, Abigail.
I was wondering with the comments you made, it made perfect sense, especially since they are spending so much of their time and paying so much of their money to try to come into the field. Is there any recommendations that you would like to see added into the alternative? Because I know that there was a lot of concern.
To tell you the truth, I mean, one of the recommendations that we made, but we couldn't really it couldn't be in the report, was not very many people do sealants. Why are we requiring all the RDAs to do sealants? Why don't we just take out sealants and require the certification course? Because the only offices that do sealants are going to be pedo offices and general practice offices. So we can exchange a course for a course, and then that's seems like it would be an even trade.
But then when you're looking at the dental part, where the dentist would be overseeing or doing the training, I mean, not the training, but looking at what the patients or the RDA is doing, what recommendations do you see in addition to what we have right here, right now?
Well,
or any changes?
Educators are required to do 30 hours of methodology before we can be faculty at a program. So if we're not requiring that of the dentist, then again, it's a double standard.
Okay.
I have a question. What is your feeling about a national board, a DANB type for California?
I think that's an excellent recommendation, and I would really be for it. It's a standardized exam. It's accepted nationally and internationally. They've been vetted out, and Cindy Jurley would be happy to discuss this because I've had conversations with her about that.
So the national exam is a written exam, and there's no clinical evaluations either. So I mean, basically what we're saying in alternative number 6 is we are moving towards that same as what the national exam is.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Yes. I mean,
So
it's
if we're
the
moving
California
toward
exam.
that, why are we making the wheel again? Developing the wheel.
Dr. Lai, I would just in response, we have looked at using the DANB exam in the past. It's certainly something that we could look at again. If that would resolve this issue, I would favor, now we can't really include that in this agenda item because that's not been noticed or anything, but this is not the first time, and you know, there's a lot of things around portability and things that would make that an attractive option. I'm sorry, Dr. Chan, I keep passing over you, I'm sorry.
Well, thank you. To go back to the fundamental questions about alternative 5 and alternative 6, because we keep wandering very, very far away from that. So just as a disclosure, as a pediatric dentist, I don't do temps. So I don't have the experience in there, but I watch trends. And there is an increasing trend to have digital impressions and digital fabrication of crowns. So we are seeing that trend. Now, is it increasing? Yes, it is. And is it increasing quickly? Yes, it is. So to have just one item to be as a standalone course, it may be rapidly becoming obsolete. That's the first observation. The second one is the question of whether or not the RDA is a promise of a competency of certain minimums. I would probably argue that when a dentist looks at hiring an RDA, it's to see if the practice can free, or by hiring an RDA, can that free up the dentist from doing other functions in there? So it's not the competency, it's now you've reached a critical mass. The critical mass is, do I need someone to help me so that it frees me up to do something else? So the question is the promise of what that RDA delivers, or is it that I need to look for someone else that can help me to deliver more? So you're going through a decision-making tree. It's a short amount of time. Think of when we went through our practices. Think of when we first started in dental school. There's a lot of things we don't do anymore because it's learned by experience. And we do things that are more predictable and things that are not, we don't do things that are not predictable. So the next part comes with, very often, our practice used to do a probationary time. You don't know what the promise is until you see what the performance is. And until the performance is there, during the probationary time, you see if the promise was delivered. And you're looking at a lot of different elements in there. Did that person say that they can do this thing? And if they can't, that'll show up really quickly. But the decision-making tree will also go to where, is this person trainable to do what I do here, or do they do not have it? And then you go through your decision-making tree whether or not you continue to hire. So there's a sorting process in that. The highest level, as we look at 5 and 6, is whether or not the processes that we're deliberating will protect or maybe foster harm to the public. So OPS has said that it can't see where there has been experiences. You've said that, Dr. Richard, you have not seen experiences in there. So we subordinate some of the other decision-making based on whether or not there has been harm or demonstrated harm over the 8 years that you've seen your experiences. The final piece is the marketplace sorts it out. The marketplace sorts it out whether or not you have consistent results or inconsistent results. When you have inconsistent results or failures in there, the market will sort out whether or not you continue with that person or you continue having that person do that. The last piece then says, when you have, and going back to 5 and 6, when you have a temporary crown that is a failure, does that patient go back and say, I got that from that RDA? Or does that person go back and say, I got that from that dentist? There's a different question. There's a frame of reference here. Thank you.
Could you identify yourself for the record, please?
Yeah. My name is Zania Delling, and I am I'm an RDA. I have a couple questions. There were some comments made by the board that I would like some clarification on, and I would also like to comment on those statements made. Dr. Chan, you had just mentioned that you saw that there's a trend that we can see that there are, the trend is that there is digital impressions. It's more likely that there are, that's on the rise, and that's gonna, I mean, that there's gonna be a lot of doctors that are gonna be going in that direction. Where is this trend recorded?
It's anecdotal, but it's also anecdotal based on conversations with a lot of the dental lab owners where they're just not performing as many.
there was actually a survey that we collected from the RDAs who responded to our survey, and they reported that they only do the temporary crowns 5% of their practice time.
Can I respond to that too? We're seeing that trend in dental education with the students before they've even graduated from dental school and have been licensed as dentists. Our students in schools now are taking digital impressions. They are milling permanent crowns with a milling machine. In fact, they are milling provisional crowns in a milling machine rather than making them the traditional fashion or like an RDA would make one. So that trend is beginning now in the educational process.
So, Dr. Morrow, you had mentioned that the that the students are making these temporary crowns and these CEREC crowns in school, but when they graduate from school, are they going to be purchasing that CEREC unit? And the reason why I'm asking this question is because I still practice, I'm a practicing RDA, and I just looked at my calendar, and out of 15 doctors' practices, different practices I've been in, 14 practices still make temporaries. 2 of those practices have a digital machine, but they still send their patients home with a temporary crown. So I think that I would like to get a survey, and I would be willing to go door to door to see how many doctors actually own a machine, how many doctors still make or have their staff make temporaries to prove my point. And the point is that there are people still making temporaries out there, whether or not we have CEREC machines or not. Some of the doctors have CEREC machines and they still send their patients home with temporary. There was a comment made that, what are we trying to accomplish? Well, that's a good question, because I had asked Dr. Hurd, Dr. Ferraro, Dr. Satia, and Dr. Hurst that question. And the question that I asked them is, would you be willing to train an RDA and take the time to teach them how to make a temporary? And they said, no. They should be taught how to do that in school. In fact, Dr. Ferraro expanded and said that, and I asked them if it was okay to use their name to represent them here at the dental board meeting. And Dr. Ferraro said that when he went to dental school, he was asked to make 100 temporaries out of the mouth on a typodont. And we continue to say that making a temporary on a typodont doesn't really prove competency. It does on many different levels. In fact, Dr. Ferraro said, I quote, that it helps the student to develop dexterity and how to handle the material properly. Yes, the OPES said that there are many different materials in dentistry today, but I think we can all agree as clinicians that the biscuit acrylic material is pretty much the same, whether it's Pro Temp or if it's Exacta. Also, Dr. Ferraro said that it's handling the materials that they get used to, meeting the margins, opening the embrasures, and understanding the anatomy. Those are basic fundamental things that an RDA should know when they graduate from an RDA approved program or a standalone approved program by the dental board. So do we, Dr. Ferraro suggested, why don't we have the programs create in their curriculum? I mean, we don't really place bases and liners anymore as RDAs because the liners are just flowable composite. Why don't we have them make more temporaries and get used to the handling of the materials and the understanding of how anatomy is so that our patients don't go home and come back with bloody tissue. I want to speak to never took a practical exam, those comments made. I understand that everybody who has not taken a practical exam they made it through this journey without having to take one. However, do we go backwards in time and say, well, you know, we have these great materials like composites, but I think we should just go back and place amalgam filling. So we don't do that generally in our profession. So I think that it is good to have not a practical exam, but we should create a path, we should create some kind of curriculum that would have the RDA, or the RDA programs make more temporaries in our programs. And right out of school, compensation, I know the doctor had mentioned that. How do we determine that? I agree. I myself helped one of my students get started in a practice, and she was an RDA, and she got her license, and I didn't think she was worth $25 an hour, okay, because she didn't have the handing of the instrument skills or anything like that, but she did get her RDA, so I think that $18 an hour would probably be a good amount, or 17 because of the pathway to licensure. But
Sorry,
I agree that it's hard to do
I'm
that.
going to ask us to stay on topic here a
Okay,
little bit.
but these are all comments made here, and I'm reflecting back on the comments made. And
If we could stay focused on
Okay.
alternative 5 and alternative 6, I think that
Okay.
would be helpful.
Well, alternative 5, I agree with Melody on the fact that she had, so do we let the candidates or the people who are learning how to make temporaries practice on patients? Or do they get to practice, do they just practice on patients and not on typodonts? I mean, that's what that paragraph was saying, in my opinion. And I think that that is not right. And I think that they should practice on typodonts first. So that was my opinion on that. Anyway, I wanted to touch on some of the comments made here on the board, and actually I was done.
I'm sorry,
but-
we're kind of running low on time.
Yeah.
Could you summarize very quickly for us?
To summarize, I think that we need to have a program, or to help the RDA programs to have to do what you had mentioned, to make it part of the portfolio, but there should be a certain amount of temporaries that the RDA programs should make, or the standalone programs, to prove competency, so that they can pass that part of their program. That's what I'm after.
Thank you. Any additional comments? I'll come back to you, Jennifer, yeah. I'd like everybody to maybe bring new information that hasn't been discussed already from this point forward, just in the interest of time.
Thank you. Paul Rigiardo, speaking for and representing the California Society of Pediatric Dentistry. I wanted to just tie in what we had talked about before when this came up initially, that the purpose of the examining process and OPES is to test for those things that are being done in the workplace or in practice. And there's a disconnect here in that those 3 procedures that we're looking at and discussing, and however we're looking at a practical examination, those procedures are not done in many, many practices. They're not done in endodontic practices, oral surgery practices, pediatric dental practices. They're not done. So in a sense, if this is maintained, you are testing for something that is not done universally, and correspondingly, those procedures that are done in those offices are not tested for. So there's a disconnect here that creates an invalid process. And I think going down that road of saying that what we're doing now, the board and OPES has decided that your licensing process for RDAs now is adequate to protect the public. Otherwise, you would not be licensing RDAs as you are now. And if it's adequate to protect the public today, adequate to protect the public yesterday when you were licensing, it is still adequate to protect the public next week and next year. I appreciate the
Thank
opportunity
you.
to speak.
Mary McCune, CDA. CDA has had a general consensus of a couple different issues, but more concepts. Option number 5 we see as something that is valuable and viable, but the things that CDA really values is protecting the on-the-job pathway and also making sure that we acknowledge that there is a workforce inadequacy with RDAs. So making sure that if we do go through with option number 5, we're acknowledging that the pricing for this type of practical alternative is now going from the government or the dental board into the private sector. So we want to make sure that the pricing would not be a barrier into the workforce. Thank you.
Jennifer, did you have a closing comment?
Actually, I just had a question for somebody from the RDA programs, because I can't really remember. When the dental board approves the curriculum, the dental board approves the curriculum for the RDA programs. Is there a specific amount of time that has to be spent on provisionals? And a number of provisionals, okay, so.
No, it's very general. They
Okay.
just have to do enough things that
Minimum.
they are competent.
And
But that's looked at when a site review is done.
Okay, and then on-job training, I'm not familiar with that. Is it just the dentist signs off, they've worked so many hours, or that they have met minimum
They have to
competency?
complete their required courses.
The certificate.
Chromopolish, radiation
Mhm.
safety, pit and fissure sealants, infection control, and CPR.
Right. And then they have to.
And then they have to do a certain number of months. I think it's 15 months
Yes, so the
of work
dentist,
experience.
the dentist will
yeah.
sign off on the time that they've practiced as a dental
So
assistant.
the dentist signs off on the time, not that they've
Well,
done,
with the understanding.
With
that
understanding that
they've
it's-
practiced as a dental assistant.
Yeah, the dentist has to basically verify that they're competent to do the duties that he's delegating, just in a very broad sense of things. That's fairly specific.
Just to answer your first question, our current regulations for the approval of registered dental assistant programs specify that the laboratory and clinical instruction shall be of sufficient duration and content for each student to achieve minimum competence in the performance of each procedure that a dental assistant and RDA is authorized to perform. So we don't drill down and specify the content for those procedures or the number of procedures or the time that would need to be
Sufficient is
spent.
the word.
Mhm.
Okay.
Fran?
I would like to move alternative 6.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any public comment? So we've heard everything and everybody's satisfied.
Doctor, what's your question on that?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Could I have somebody then summarize what 6 says, just so we're all on the same table and have an understanding of, because it was a little confusing to those of us that got this last minute. What does it mean?
You want? Go ahead.
Why don't you do it, Sarah?
In terms of how it would work for implementation, it essentially would mean that it would remain status quo. So when the board suspended the practical examination, the only requirement in terms of examination are the written examination and the law and ethics examination. So, and we don't have any data to support that that's not working at this point in time. So, and we can always come back and review that in the future once we have sufficient data. But essentially, what this would mean is an RDA who graduates from either a board-approved program or through on-the-job training would have to supply documentation of having completed these courses, either through that educational pathway or through the standalone courses, which includes the Corona Polish. They don't need pit and fissure sealants for initial licensure, but they would need the 8-hour infection control course, the Dental Practice Act 2-hour course, Corona Polish, and radiation safety. And then the BLS course would also be required. They would then submit their application either with the certificate of completion from the program or the current application signing off from the dentist that they've completed 15 months of work experience as a DA. They would then be issued eligibility to take our written examinations, which is the written examination and the law and ethics through PSI. They would then go to PSI, take those tests, we would get those results, and then they would become licensed upon completing all of those requirements.
Yeah, sorry, the way this was written, it didn't really make it that clear. Dr. Morrow?
Yeah, just wanted to say that I see and view, option number 6 as being, what we are doing right now.
Yes.
But also, I see that it puts an additional responsibility on us as the dental board for approving the RDA courses, because it is our responsibility to approve the course. Is that right? So, in Business Code 1752.1, we have a long laundry list of the activities or the duties that a dental assistant can perform. In our approval of programs, are we requiring that the program demonstrate competence in those at the completion of the program? Do they need to demonstrate competence that their graduates are competent to enter minimum competency to do all of that laundry list of actions or activities that they are licensed to do? If not, then shame on us. We haven't designed the program properly, because we need to put some teeth into our approval of a program or our non-approval of the program, and what is the outcome of that program. And if we're not, then we need to tighten up our ship as far as approving those programs. Okay?
That's a good point. We do, however, have a motion on the floor, but I think that we're aware that is something
Right, but
that we need to look at.
Yeah, but that is part of my discussion of the motion that's on the floor right now, okay? I agree with the motion. I support the motion to accept, alternative number 6, because I think it does meet the responsibilities of protection of the public, and also minimum competencies are basically, our purpose is protecting the public and providing licensees that are, I refer to them as safe starters. Okay? They're safe to start. They certainly, I was safe to start when I graduated from dental school, but I certainly had a lot more skills and abilities shortly after that.
Point of reference, please.
And as Meredith said, she was not the attorney that she was then, now anymore. So
Okay,
we
I
need
think,
to focus
yeah.
on the safe starter as far as protecting, and I think number 6 does that.
Thank you. Cara?
I just wanted to mention that this is kind of a unique situation because there's not very many occupations where someone is on the job trained and receives the license. So again, I just wanted to bring up the part about it just seems to me like there's a double standard when it comes to educational programs, and why would someone go through an educational program if they only had to take some classes and then they could get their license. And we can go round and round in this, I totally understand it, but I just wanted again to just remind everybody that this is one of the few licenses that an on-the-job person can get. We require estheticians and hairdressers that work with chemicals as well to have some sort of practical exam. So I'm not saying go back to a practical exam, but I just am for this standalone course.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
Okay,
Guess we're ready to vote.
we're ready to vote, and the motion is to move forward with alternative number 6. And I will call the roll. Burton?
Yes.
I've got some feedback here. Chan?
Yes.
Chappelle Ingram? Forsythe?
Yes.
Lai?
No.
No?
No.
Okay. Lay?
Yes.
Mackenzie?
No.
Medina?
No.
Morrow?
Yes.
Stewart? Yes. Witcher? Davis, Washington.
Yes.
And Rodriguez.
Yes.
Mr. President, the yeas have it. It passes.
Thank you, and thank you for the discussion. I think it was very thorough, and I'm really proud of everybody airing all the points that we did. Karen, yes.
I'd just like to make a comment for some of the issues that were addressed by Ms. McKenzie in terms of the concern that the dentists aren't performing the supervisory role that they should be performing. I think that's a separate issue from what we're talking about here. And just consider that it is on the record, and it may be something that the board should consider in the future. If it's anecdotal at this point because we don't have any complaints against RDAs to back up that essentially they're performing procedures that are going out the door that are inappropriate in some way. Also, Dr. Lai, your comment about the workforce issue, I think that that's a seriously valid comment, really unrelated to licensing per se, but that's another issue that perhaps the board should consider in the future in terms of whether we do have a workforce shortage of RDAs in the state.
Okay, we have a few more minutes. I'd like to go ahead and get our ledge report here. Let's take up 5. Okay, that makes sense, yeah. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and break for lunch. We're gonna take an hour and a half for lunch. We'll try to be back at 1:45, and we'll reconvene at 1:45 p.m. So, and we'll resume with the Ledge Committee, okay? I'd like to reconvene the meeting. Looks like we have a few people who went to lunch and decided to take an extended lunch.
Are you saying that they're out to lunch?
I wasn't going to say that. Okay, everybody set? Okay, let's resume with agenda 5, item 5A. Allison. We're gonna hold Ledge Committee as part of the main board agenda. You probably noticed we don't have a separate committee meeting, so we'll just go right through it. Some of the committee meetings have been put on as full board items in the interest of time.
Good afternoon. I'm Allison Viramontes. I'm the Legislative and Regulatory Analyst for the board. Good to see you guys again. In regards to agenda item 5A, this is the 2018 tentative legislative calendar. We've included both the Assembly and Senate calendars for completeness sake, but as it appears, they both have the same deadlines and dates on the calendars. That's all I have for that one.
5B, end of year summary.
Yes, so enclosed in your board meeting packet is the 2017 end of year legislative summary report, which provides a status regarding bills followed during the legislative year. The status updates were verified with the Assembly and Senate staff members. Within this document, I've outlined bills that are considered to be dead and have been designated as 2-year bills. Notably, we have AB 40, or Assembly Bill 40, Assembly Bill 1277, and Assembly Bill 1707. These were chaptered and signed by the governor and will become effective on January 1st, 2018, unless they were noted as urgency bills, which would take effect immediately.
Any questions on any of these bills? We're sort of in a between sessions hold here. I know there have been some informational hearings going on that I mentioned, but nothing really resumes, I think, until January 3rd is the first day they go back into session.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. Okay, moving along to 5C.
So this is the discussion and action regarding the legislative proposals for 2018. The Senate Business Professions and Economic Development Committee will be introducing 2 omnibus bills for 2018. I've been in contact with Elisa Silva, and she's a consultant for the committee, and they've requested that omnibus bill proposals be submitted by January 9th, 2018. There was an amendment, and Jerry will distribute, it's a non-substantive amendment to the proposal regarding Business and Professions Code 1750.2. For clarification purposes, this is brought to our attention, and it's been approved by Michael. I sent it to him beforehand, but we just combined one of the numbers. Committee staff will review the proposal and consult with the Republican caucus and their staff, as well as committee members, to determine if the proposals that are submitted are suitable for inclusion in the omnibus bill.
Excuse me. Can you explain what omnibus means?
Omnibus bill, I believe it's just for non-substantive changes that are things that won't be affecting the board or bureaus as a whole. Like cleanup language from what I understand. Yes.
I don't understand it.
So each year, the Senate Business and Professions Committee or the Assembly Business and Professions Committee sponsor 2 bills. One is a healing arts sponsored bill and one is a non-healing arts sponsored bill. It's an opportunity for all of the boards and bureaus within DCA to submit technical, non-controversial language changes that may help expedite their business processes, provide clarification to questions that have come up. But the key part to the omnibus bill is that it needs to be non-controversial. So as soon as anything comes up that there's any relative question about, they usually yank that out of the language immediately. So this was our opportunity to go through, clarify some of our statutes that clearly relate to dentistry, but then to also make sure that it's clearly defined as it relates to dental assisting as well. And so as you go through your packet, that's what we've included in the meeting materials. The amendment that Allison was just speaking to was a clarification regarding the application process for the orthodontic assistant permit. The application requirements lived in 2 different statutes, and it wasn't really clear that an OA could be either a licensed RDA or that they needed to have the work experience. So in an effort to kind of clarify what that process was, we proposed an amendment. Unfortunately, the way it was numbered and organized made it look like you had to be an RDA, and so that's what Allison has distributed. So we've corrected the numbering so that it clarifies what the actual requirements are. It doesn't change the requirements, it just provides clarification.
It is, and if I could add further, it's just a general way once a year that you can clean up statute without having to do it in individual bills. And so you take everything, for instance, in the healing arts area, and anything that needs to be cleaned up. I mean, for instance, believe it or not, until a couple of years ago, we were still listed as the Board of Dental Examiners, and we haven't been that in a long time. So it was a way to change that in statute in one big bill. And it's a bill that's usually about this thick, to make all of those changes and clarifications that are non-controversial and will get the support not only of the committee but of both houses.
Dr. Witcher, I have a couple of questions if I could. I noticed that you are recommending 1601.5 be struck from the code. That a practicing dentist includes a member of a faculty of any dental college. What is the rationale for striking that?
The language begins with for the purpose of section 1601, so it's defining practicing dentist for the purpose of section 1601. Section 1601 no longer exists, and so it's obsolete at this point.
How about section 1601.1 identifies that 8 practicing dentists, this is the makeup of the board, 1 shall be a member of a faculty of any California dental college. That has some lack of clarity, in my opinion, primarily because we have a lot more part-time faculty members than we do full-time faculty members in the dental schools in California. So what constitutes a faculty member of a dental school that qualifies for that position? Is it a full-time faculty member that has a, let's say, a career of being an educator? Or could someone who holds a faculty appointment but only be a clinical instructor for a half a day a week, does that fit that requirement? So what is the intention of that, identifying that one individual needs to be a member of a faculty?
So in my assessment, that particular potential amendment could draw controversy and is not necessarily considered clarifying. And so in going through the proposed amendments, we took meetings with some stakeholder groups from dental assisting and went through essentially a wish list of items and areas that we needed to have clarified. And only a small portion of that was actually included in this particular language because we want to keep it non-controversial. We want to have success with this and make sure that no questions come up. So there are areas that I think we're going to have this unique opportunity in the coming year with the report for the Sunset Review to address some of these areas that we have questions about and where we need to seek clarification. And so from a staff's perspective, I would recommend that type of a question or a proposed amendment may be better suited for discussion during Sunset Review as part of our Sunset Review report.
Okay. Thanks.
If I may, this is where it's kind of up to the appointing authority to make those kind of determinations. And sometimes it's good for them to have more flexibility, or you could argue maybe that it isn't. I don't know, but if that's just kind of the way that it's worked up till now. Are there any other comments on this item, on the omnibus proposal?
Mary McCune with California Dental Association. So I think in light of Sarah's last comments, one of the issues that CDA wanted to raise might be better suited in the sunset, but I just wanted to make sure in the portfolio regs, it goes to identify that portfolio competency examiners are dental faculty, but in the omnibus in 1621 subsection C, it says that an examiner can't be an officer or faculty member. If that's deemed to be more of a controversial change, then I would go and recommend to maybe table that conversation for Sunset Review. And then our second comment was so the omnibus bill goes to add the RDA license as a pathway in lieu of the 15 months of work experience for the OA permit, but it doesn't have that similar addition in the DSA permit. So I just wanted to know if that was an intentional omission or not.
I think Sarah would be better to answer that. The DSA was not intentional. We just don't have a lot of DSA applicants, so the OA came to our attention. But if the board approves in concept, we can add language to that effect. And I'm sorry, I forgot your first question.
It was just for portfolio.
Oh, the portfolio, that was not intentional. Sorry, I was just looking at that. And I think we could probably, that statute that's been in there for a very long time, I think it probably just was overlooked when we were developing portfolio. So we could add in with the board's approval, with the exception of portfolio examination, the board's portfolio examination to clarify that.
What section is that?
Would you like a motion on that?
Yes, it's page 4. Starts on page 3, section 1621. And it outlines the requirements to be an examiner of the board. And as you can see, this is language that's been in existence for a very long time. So that was not intentional to exclude portfolio, so we can clarify that as well.
So the idea is we would make portfolio an exception to that requirement.
Yes.
Does everybody understand?
Yeah, well, I think this requirement was when the board itself was conducting a clinical examination, which we don't do anymore. And I hope we don't do again. So I would just as soon see it taken out altogether.
Right. We still need this provision for the RDAEF exam.
Okay.
That's
That explains it. So do you have specific language?
if you could just approve in concept, then,
Okay.
and then we can work with Michael to develop that language. On BMP code section 1621, approve in concept for approval of examiners that portfolio examiners can be faculty at dental schools. And then also approve in concept, in addition to everything else in here, that the DSA language mirror what's currently in the proposal for the orthodontic assistant permit.
If that needs a motion, I so move.
Okay, we need a second?
Second.
Okay, so Morrow, Stewart. Any public comment on those changes? Okay, seeing none. You'll need a rule sheet there, I guess. Thank you.
Roll call on this. Burton?
Yes.
Chan?
Yes.
Forsythe?
Yes.
Lai?
Yes.
Lay? McKenzie? Medina?
Yes.
Morrow?
Yes.
Stewart?
Yes.
Witcher? Mr. President, it passes.
Thank you. Moving on, update on pending regulatory packages, 5D.
Allison Miramontes, still up here. Continuing education requirements and basic life support equivalency standards. So the board deemed this regulatory package to be a priority. And at the last board meeting, we tabled presenting proposed language for the board's consideration to research whether they had the regulatory authority to accept anything approved by the medical board. Board staff is presenting their findings and their proposed language at this meeting for the board's consideration to initiate a possible rulemaking in a separate agenda item. In regards to the dental assisting comprehensive rulemaking, we're continuing to work on the development of final proposed language and we'll present it to the board for consideration at a future meeting. Regarding determination of radiographs and placement of interim therapeutic restorations, board staff has drafted the initial rulemaking file documents and it's currently pending internal review. Elective facial cosmetic surgery permit application requirements and renewal requirements. Again, we have drafted the initial rulemaking file documents and it's currently pending internal review. In regards to the fee increase, I know that we spoke about it a little bit earlier. We submitted the final rulemaking to the department on June 7th. The final approved rulemaking file was submitted to the Office of Administrative Law on August 16, 2017, and it was approved and became effective on August 24th, 2017. And staff has already shared a more in-depth update regarding that. In regards to institutional standards, board staff has drafted the initial rulemaking documents and it's currently pending internal review. Regarding licensure by credential application requirements, board staff is currently working on the rulemaking file documents to bring to the board for consideration at a future meeting. Regarding the mobile dental clinic and portable dental unit registration requirements, staff presented revised language at the August 2017 meeting for the board's consideration, which was approved unanimously. However, after receiving feedback from the California Dental Hygienists Association and the Dental Hygiene Committee of California, board staff will be presenting language to reinstate a rulemaking in February 2018. Regarding citation and fine, the board directed staff to initiate the rulemaking and staff is currently working on the rulemaking file documents to bring to the board for consideration at a future meeting regarding minimum standards for infection control. AB 1277 required the board to adopt emergency regulations and prepare an emergency rulemaking to the Office of Administrative Law to meet the December 31st, 2018 deadline for final regulations. Board staff is presenting proposed language at this meeting for the board's consideration to initiate the rulemaking. Excuse me.
Thank you. 5E, prospective legislative proposals.
All I have is stakeholders are encouraged to submit proposals in writing to the board before or during the meeting for possible consideration. All I have.
Very good. We don't get too many proposals, but once in a while we do. Okay, Allison again, number 6.
Yes. So board staff has prepared proposed regulatory language to present. We prepared language to present at the August 2017 board meeting that would identify PACE and serve as approved providers to California Code of Regulations Section 1016.2 if adopted. However, the board received correspondence from the American Safety and Health Institute that they did not accept PACE or CERP providers. Board staff researched, again, whether the board had the regulatory authority to accept anything approved by the Medical Board of California, which included the American Safety and Health Institute. And unfortunately, we could not find anything in statute or the board's regulation that states the board can accept anything approved by the Medical Board. Therefore, board staff has prepared language to accept basic life support courses offered by providers who are approved by the American Dental Association's Continuing Education Recognition Program, the Academy of General Dentistry's Program Approval for Continuing Education, or the American Safety and Health Institute for the board's consideration. And so we're asking that the board consider and possibly approve the proposed regulatory language relative to the basic life support provider and course requirements, and direct staff to take all necessary steps to initiate the formal rulemaking process, including noticing for the proposed language for 45-day public comment, setting the proposed language for a public hearing, and delegating authority to the executive officer to make any technical or non-substantive changes to the rulemaking package. And if after the close of the 45-day public comment period and public regulatory hearing, no adverse comments are received, delegate authority to the executive officer to make any technical or non-substantive changes to the proposed regulation before completing the rulemaking process, and adopt the proposed amendments to California Code of Regulations Title 16, Section 1016.2 as noticed in the proposed text.
So just a clarification. I just wanted to add a couple comments to this. So I realize that naming a specific institution is not what we typically do. And board staff, we had several meetings where we were trying to weigh our options. And the entire purpose of this is trying to open up the parameters of basic life support to ensure that our registered dental assistant applicants have the ability to seek these courses through approved providers. But at the same time, the board staff is limited in its resources to do program or course approvals. And so in an effort to avoid having to establish the course parameters and then putting staff in the position of having to approve these individual programs, we thought it best to essentially accept courses that have already been approved by American Heart Association, American Red Cross, PACE, or CERP. Unfortunately, ASHE is not PACE or CERP approved. They are medical board approved. And I know they have other certifications as well. They more than qualify to be able to offer basic life support. And I just wanted to point out, this is a very unique situation, but board staff does believe that this is in the best interest of consumer protection to accept them.
Yes, Dr. Chan.
So just as clarification, if ASHI isn't PACE or CERP, and yet if we accept them, then the basic life support CE doesn't apply?
No.
Because it's not ACE.
No, it would apply. This would,
It would
this
apply.
would.
This would grant them the
This would
approval.
grant them the approval for both continuing education and for the purpose of applying for RDA licensure to be able to be approved and accepted by the board for both renewal and application.
Yeah, if you want, I can go over this with you, but it has to do with the fact that individually approving these courses that are out there in really great numbers, as you know. I mean, everybody's got these courses and they vary widely in their content. We're kind of making a one-time exception. The reason that you don't, this happened before you came on the board, but ASHI actually filed a petition with the board, which we granted to consider their request, which anybody can do. Had we denied the petition, there's an appeal route that they could have gone. And on advice of counsel, we granted their petition. So then we were, encouraged, shall we say, to take action on this. And we looked at various ways of doing it. It's taken us 4 years to get here, but we're here now. So that's a little background there.
So the clarification just was, we have the requirement to take basic life support, but whether or not you get continuing education, I think you've had that.
Well, you would always get that if you take it, from an approved provider. Yeah.
So the way just continuing education for already licensed individuals. The basic life support for continuing education could be American Red Cross, American Heart Association, or a PACE or CERP approved BLS provider. Those were all accepted. For the purpose of application for RDA licensure, the way the statute was created was it only accepted American Red Cross or American Heart Association or board equivalent. The purpose of this regulation is to deem what we accept as equivalent. And so to make it equitable to what we currently have for the CE requirements, we're proposing acceptance of PACE and CERP for the RDA pathway and the addition of ASHI to both. So ASHI would be accepted as a provider for the purpose of BLS for continuing education, and it would be accepted for the purpose of RDA licensure.
Dr. Witcher, I just want to make note that Joe Rose, the attorney representing ASHI, was here this morning but was unable to stay this afternoon. He just wanted to go on the record as being in support of the regulations as written.
Good. I was looking around, didn't see him here, and I knew he was here. So thanks for relaying that. Sounds like, okay, could we have a motion on this? Dr. Morrow, second? Judy? Okay, so Morrow and Judy. Any public comment on this agenda item? Okay, seeing none. Yvette, could you call the roll?
Okay. Burden?
Yes.
Chan?
Yes.
Forsythe?
Yes.
Lai?
Yes.
Lay?
Yes.
McKenzie?
Yes.
Medina?
Yes.
Morrow?
Yes.
Stewart? Witcher?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Moving along, item number 7, discussion of possible action to initiate an emergency rulemaking regarding minimum standards for infection control.
So Assembly Bill 1277 was signed into law by Governor Brown on October 2nd, 2017, which involved infection control. And this bill requires the board to amend regulations on the minimum standards for infection control to require water or other methods used for irrigation to be sterile or contain recognized disinfecting or antibacterial properties when performing dental procedures that expose dental pulp. This bill, as stated earlier, requires the board to adopt emergency regulations and prepare an emergency rulemaking for the Office of Administrative Law to meet the December 31st, 2018 deadline for final regulations. Assembly Bill 1277 only gives the board the statutory authority to implement emergency regulations regarding the minimum standards for infection control, again, when performing dental procedures that expose dental pulp. I'm aware that there was recommendations made prior to the passage of Assembly Bill 1277 by the Infection Control Subcommittee, but those may be better addressed in the regular rulemaking process. So essentially the rulemaking process is 2 steps here. So if the language is approved for the emergency regulations, we begin the emergency rulemaking process, which is outlined in the action requested language in this memo, I believe on the back, on the front and back. Essentially, if the motion is granted to initiate the emergency rulemaking, we would submit the language to the Office of Administrative Law. There would be a 5-day public comment period in which the board would not be required to respond to those comments, because an emergency rulemaking basically creates regulations that are temporary until a final rulemaking is passed. And again, in this case, we have until December 31st, 2018 to complete the final regular rulemaking. Once the emergency rulemaking is completed, the regular rulemaking process can begin. And again, the subcommittee's recommendations can be addressed and included in the regular rulemaking process if the board so chooses. Therefore, board staff is presenting proposed language at this meeting for the board's consideration to initiate the emergency rulemaking that reflects the authority granted by this bill. It's my understanding that the recommended language in your material regarding California Code of Regulations, Section 1005B22, which is on the last page of the language, was a result of a subcommittee meeting that occurred in February 2017 prior to the passage of Assembly Bill 1277. After further deliberation, staff is only recommending the language in Section 1005B18, which is on page 5, because this matches the statutory authority to proceed with the emergency rulemaking. Just to back up a little bit here. So this is the first emergency rulemaking that we've done since very long time. So I've been here over 10 years and I don't remember an emergency rulemaking. So this process is a little bit different. And so, as you know, annually the minimum standards for infection control are reviewed by the subcommittee. And so this year it was Dr. Lay and then Noelle Kelsch, who's the president of the Dental Hygiene Committee, because we do it to reach a consensus. They initially met in February of 2017 prior to AB 1277 being introduced, but it was at the height of the discussion regarding water. We'll leave it at that. So at that time, the subcommittee had determined that, maybe it's in the best interest if we mirror our minimum standards for infection control to mirror what's in the CDC guidelines, the newly released CDC guidelines. And so that's the language that you see on page 6 of 6 of the proposed language in subdivision 22. That was prior to 1277 going through. 1277 then brought forth the language that you see on page 5, which states that water or other methods used for irrigation shall be sterile or contain recognized disinfecting or antibacterial properties when performing procedures that expose dental pulp. That's straight out of the statute. And so what staff is recommending at this point is to no longer move forward with what you see in section 22, only move forward with what you see in section 18 as part of this emergency rulemaking file. Now, Allison walked us through the process where you have to notice it for 5 days, but essentially we don't have to accept comment. It becomes law. But every time you do an emergency rulemaking file, you have to follow it up with our regular rulemaking process, which we're all accustomed to. The regular rulemaking process is going to afford us the opportunity to make other amendments in the minimum standards for infection control that the subcommittee had discussed in February of 2017. We didn't have that authority to make those other changes because this was limited in statute to just the water. So that's why we're proposing moving forward with this emergency rulemaking at this time today, just section 18, the amendments you see on page 5. And then at the February meeting, we're hoping to bring forward a regular rulemaking that would incorporate this section 18, as well as other modifications to the minimum standards for infection control. That process would look similar to what we do normally. You issue it you publish it, 45-day public comment period, etc. It goes to the department, agency, Department of Finance, and then OIL approves it. So I just wanted to provide a little clarification on what we were asking here.
Just for clarification, you said that by moving 18, we're doing just the water, although 22 talks about systems that treat water.
It does. And that was initially the discussion that the subcommittee had prior to the bill coming into effect. So this was a first wave attempt at addressing the water disinfection issue and then trying to bring it in compliance with the CDC guidelines. Upon further review, I don't know that particular section is going to be necessary now that AB 1277 provides what we have here.
Okay, thank
Richard? I have just a question and a comment. Number 18, the way it is worded in this regulatory language is so all-encompassing that, in my opinion, as a practicing dentist, there are a lot of unforeseen consequences of this wording. There are many times that a pulp tissue will be invaded, let's put it that way, or exposed unintentionally. Carious exposure, a mechanical exposure, and that's saying, this is just saying all-encompassing. Anytime that the pulp is exposed, you have to have this sterile irrigating solution. I don't know for sure when that pulp is going to be exposed. Now, if it was intentionally exposed, such as, and we all know what the basis for this regulatory, what this code was for, change. Those were all procedures that the pulp was intended to be exposed, intended to have partial removal of. That's different than an unexpected or an unintended exposure of the pulp. But the way this is worded here, it's all encompassing.
I'm going to defer to Mary and CDA.
So CDA would actually like to offer a slight amendment to this proposed language. Instead of saying that, to address the exact issues that you brought up, instead of stating performing procedures that expose dental pulp, we'd like to amend that to be more specific and say when performing procedures on exposed dental pulp. That way, once the dental pulp is exposed, it is only at that point at which the standard of care would have to be changed so that the antimicrobial or sterile water would have to be used on that tooth.
Okay. That helps, thanks.
Any questions on that amendment? Is everybody satisfied with that? Thank you, Dr. Moore. I was hoping you'd weigh in on that. Well, I think we need a motion to accept the amendment. So voting on the amendment first? Or can we take it all as one motion?
Could I clarify, could we have that language again? What, instead of what you have in the materials?
So it would say, water or other methods used for irrigation shall be sterile or contain recognized disinfecting or antibacterial properties when performing procedures on exposed dental pulp. Michael, it appears to me that that's clarifying what's in statute. It would be acceptable.
That's what I'm trying to think,
Yeah.
just for a quick
Well,
second.
no, let's give you a minute.
My initial opinion is that it doesn't meet what the statute requires the board to do. Because it's slightly different in terms of the statute requires the phrase when performing dental procedures that expose dental pulp. If you're saying on exposed, or when performing procedures on exposed dental pulp, there's a difference because I think the statute actually does encompass everything. That's what the statute, how I interpret it, is when performing dental procedures, expose it. So it could be any procedure. The amendment that was offered today is just when on exposed dental pulp. So that doesn't meet the requirement, in my opinion, of what the statute says in terms of the procedures. Because we're looking at the procedures, not just on the dental pulp. So if it's a procedure that exposed dental pulp, it's a little bit, it's a little bit of a difference, in my opinion. I would prefer that the board actually take word for word what's in the statute instead of trying to interpret what the legislature is telling the board to do. I think it's more, it's legally defensible. No one can say that you're not following what the legislature intended by deviating from the wording that's strictly in the statute.
But it's not in the statute.
It is in the statute. The statute tells the board exactly what they have to do in terms of the emergency rulemaking.
anytime you're operating on a tooth, you have the potential to expose the pulp. Anytime you're operating on a tooth, you have the potential to expose a pulp. So it's all encompassing. It's every time you're there. How you don't know until you get there. So how do you?
I don't think it's all that encompassing because the wording of the statute doesn't say potentially or when. I mean, I'm sure there are those procedures that actually have the intention of exposing dental pulp, correct? That you have procedures XYZ, of those, only 2 procedures expose dental pulp. The third one could possibly, correct? In that instance, I don't believe the legislature wanted it or intended it that for that procedure Z, which could possibly expose a dental pulp, meaning that you would have to apply the same standards as you would to X and Y, in which the procedure actually does expose the dental pulp. So it's not about the possibility, because yes, every single procedure you do could expose it, just like every single procedure you do could have the possibility of causing blood or something else to happen. But what we're looking here at is the procedure itself. If it exposes the dental pulp, then this more rigorous, this more stringent requirement of the sterile water has to apply.
You know, I think we're trying to say the same thing. I think the question really is, does this fall within interpreting, implementing, or making specific the law? I mean, that's what we're supposed to do when we do a rulemaking, right? Are we somehow violating the statutory authority by making that change, or is it within the authority we've been provided?
Dr. Witcher? Question.
Yes.
For our legal counsel. If we altered the wording to say, when performing procedures that are intended to expose the pulp, would that change the intent of the legislation? That means that it wouldn't cover those that were unintended. Because every time you put a burr to a tooth, you run the risk of exposing the pulp. But I think the intent here is when you're purposely exposing the pulp, which is what's done in pulpotomies.
I just want to, okay, so let me give you a little bit of background. I have had the same conversations many, many times with the staff and also with CDA. We couldn't really come up to an agreement of any sort. So this is what was taken from the legislature, the statute. And Mary and I'm sorry if you feel like I yelled at you, but that's the same conversations I had. I just want to draw your attention and focus to the word irrigation. And maybe that would help you feel better.
So this was just brought to my attention, but Assemblymember Tom Daly just submitted a letter to Dr. Bruce Witcher, and if permitted, can I read it out loud? It's regarding this. Dear Dr. Witcher, I am writing to reach out to the Dental Board of California regarding my bill, AB 1277, which was signed into law on October 2nd. My calls for the Dental Board of California to amend the regulations on the minimum standards for infection control for certain dental procedures where exposure of the dental pulp may create an opportunity for infection. I introduced this legislation in response to the dozens of reported cases of young children requiring hospitalization after being treated last year at a dental clinic in Anaheim. The children were exposed to Mycobacterium abscessus before undergoing pulpotomies, dental procedures that expose dental pulp. AB 1277 sets a standard for infection control that requires dentists to use sterile water or a disinfecting or antibacterial agent when irrigating exposed dental pulp. I am pleased that the dental community supported AB 1277 and was willing to work with me to find a targeted and appropriate solution for the dozens of serious infections that happened in my community. With the implementation of these infection control requirements, I hope we can prevent tragedies like this in the future. And so I just wanted to draw attention to the fact that he states AB 1277 sets a standard for infection control that requires dentists to use sterile water or a disinfecting or antibacterial agent when irrigating exposed dental pulp.
When was that letter written?
Today.
Oh, today. Okay, I was gonna say, because we haven't received
It was
that
just
letter.
sent.
It's out there somewhere. So, Michael, where does that leave us?
Well, I think, well, I mean, this goes back to, again, statutory construction. If there's any vagueness, then that's when we go to we go to the policy behind it, we go to legislative intent. I don't know if the substance of that letter that was just submitted today actually exists anywhere in the committee reports or it was testified to. That definitely would lead credence to supporting the intended edit for the infection control, but I'm still looking at it from a strictly statutory perspective. I'm looking from a black letter law perspective. The statute clearly says to the board, amend it to say this. Now, when you're not going to go against it, that's when you chip away at the legally defensibility that the board has. So that's my concern, and that's where I'm coming from, is a strictly legal standpoint. I understand the policy and how it could look that it's still within the public policy realm, especially with the author's intent. But I'm looking at it from, are you following exactly what the law's telling the board to do? And in my opinion, it's not, if you're not putting the wording that 1601.6 tells the board to do.
So Michael, just procedurally then, if we pursue this language that's outlined in statute through the emergency rulemaking, and then we find evidence to support the potential to change this language in the future, could that be addressed during the regular rulemaking?
Oh yeah, I mean, if you wanted to go ahead with the edit to say exposed dental pulp, I mean, OAL, they might approve it, they might not, it just depends on who you get. So it could most likely go through, and it could probably exist and no one would ever challenge it. I'm just saying from a perspective of legal defensibility that there still might be an issue. Could be like 1%, 0.1%, I don't know. It's just that if you want a solid concrete leg to stand on, it's to follow the exact phrasing of the language that's in 1601.6. So it's obviously the board's call if you still want to go forward with saying exposed dental pulp instead of procedures that expose dental pulp. And I don't know, maybe there's no one in the world who would challenge the board if they wanted to go ahead with that minute change. So it's still within the board's realm to decide what it wants to do.
Okay, what's the will of the board? I don't think anybody's, is it, oh, it's been moved and seconded. Yeah, we can take public comment, sure. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, okay, it hasn't been moved. Would somebody, do we have a decision as to what we're gonna do with this? I thought you did too.
What was the motion?
To accept the proposed language as modified for the rulemaking. Did we get a second on that?
Did you say? Yeah, I heard you say. I'll second it.
Okay, 4 seconds. Okay, now we can have discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the board. My name's Mike Rust. I'm with ProEdge Dental Water Labs in Denver, Colorado, and I flew out here just to lend our expertise in 14 years of testing water. We're a commercial lab that tests dental unit water lines. We were involved with Anaheim. We tested their water, and we're pretty familiar with that case. We're one of many labs that can test dental unit water lines to make sure that it meets the standards set by the CDC and the ADA, 500 colony forming units per milliliter of water. And I'm here, I wanted to just make sure that you guys understood that if the goal, as stated in the letter, is to avoid another Anaheim outbreak, you might want to take a look at the language Because what happened in Anaheim had happened previously in Atlanta. And when it happened in Atlanta, the language as written in 19 wouldn't stop another outbreak. Simply having a recognized disinfecting or antibacterial property during a procedure that exposes PO wouldn't have stopped the kids in Anaheim, or in Atlanta, excuse me, from that exposure. The problem, what I can tell you, what I have as 14 years of data, is that the products that are out there that treat dental unit water lines don't work nearly as good as we thought. They work between 50 and 90% of the time, but a lot of them work less than that on average. I'd be happy to share the data on how the different types of products work. But the truth is, it's not that easy to get clean water. For regular dentistry, for just regular irrigation, it's not that easy to get water from your air water syringe and your high-speed handpiece and your Cavitrons to meet the standard of 500 CFU. It takes regular shocking with a pretty nasty chemical. It takes the proper use of an effective product. Some of the products aren't that effective. It takes training, and it takes testing, regular testing. And it takes frequent testing, before you get pretty good at it and getting good results. So those are the real world results that I'm familiar with. So I would just let you know that in and of itself, using a product that's even a Cal EPA approved disinfectant that's approved for dental unit water lines will not meet the goal of stopping another outbreak. It takes more. I think you need to consider the fact that they should be able to. Maybe they should be sure that the water is safe if it's in a procedure like this, and it's not enough just to buy a product. It's like saying, when you guys were you guys are probably too young, but in 1990, we just started testing autoclaves, and they failed at the same rate that water tests fail now. So they failed a third of the time. Nowadays, autoclaves pass at 98%, 99% of the time. And that's because they test their autoclaves every week. So when you're making these rules, consider that you're kind of at the same stage with water as you were with autoclaves 30 years ago. Anyway, if you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. I guess I would just respond that the etiology at Anaheim is very unclear. And I know what you're saying from a sterility infection control standpoint, but here we have a single clinic with a lot of other surrounding clinics that were unaffected, probably some of them on the same water supply. So, whether it's the procedure, the water, or the units, they have not really, I know Karen and Dr. Lay, if you could help me with this, as I understand, they were never really able to make a clear determination. So to require this across the board in all cases, I think is pretty onerous and may not achieve the desired outcome. So I think, the intent was that if you expose a pulp, you should take measures. I think that was the intent of the legislation as I understand it.
Right. My point is that you should take measures, but you should take measures that are effective. It's not enough to put a disinfectant in there that may or may not work. That's all I'm saying. I think it might be better to say, let's either use sterile water from a sterile source, or let's use water that we've tested and we know is safe.
Mr. Russ, thank you for coming today. Did you offer up this testimony to the California Dental Association while the bill was going through the legislature?
No, I did not.
Okay.
We'll have another shot at this when we do infection control regs with the regular rulemaking.
Thank you.
This will give us an opportunity to look at it further if necessary. And, I think we're anticipating some provisions when we do the full rulemaking package that would address some additional waterline safety things, such as you're describing. Okay, so any other comment on this agenda item?
You know, I just
Yes.
want to say, and I think I mentioned it in a previous meeting, in our current infection control standards, 100518, B18, it already states that surgical procedures on soft tissue or bone must be irrigated with sterile irrigants delivered through a sterile delivery system. So pulp tissue is a soft tissue, not a hard tissue, it's not bone. So already there's an infection control standard that says that procedures on soft tissue, pulp, must be irrigated with sterile solution delivered through a sterile delivery system. It's already there.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Okay, Yvette, why don't you go ahead and call roll?
Thank you.
Can I just ask for
Oh,
clarification?
sure. Mhm.
I just want to make sure for the purpose of OAL that we get this accurate. So the motion was to not move forward with what's in subdivision 22, only move forward with what's in 18 as what was amended and proposed by CDA today, which is water or other methods used for irrigation shall be sterile or contain recognized disinfecting or antibacterial properties when performing procedures on exposed dental pulp. Correct?
That is my understanding.
Thank you.
And also for further clarification, the section that Dr. Morrow just read will be changed to be what this says now.
No, that's not
No?
what's,
No.
okay. So that would stay the same, it's just renumbered.
Mhm.
That's not part of this proposal.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, I don't think we want to change that. Okay, back to Yvette.
Okay, Burton?
Yes.
Chan?
Yes.
Chappelle, yes. Forsythe?
Yes.
Lai? Lay?
Yes.
McKenzie?
Yes.
Medina?
Yes.
Morrow?
No.
Stewart?
Yes.
Witcher?
Yes.
Thank you, it passes.
Okay, we've covered 8. Let's go on to 9, update on loan repayment program.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Melissa Brocken. I'm a licensing analyst in the DDS unit. And today I would like to provide an update on the loan repayment program, specifically regarding what changes are being made to the program pursuant to Assembly Bill 2485. And I would like to open with just a brief overview of the program. So the loan repayment program allows a dentist that is licensed in California to receive loan repayment through the dental board by signing an agreement to work in an underserved clinic for 3 years. And over this 3-year period, the participant may be awarded up to $105,000 in loan repayment from the dental board. The program did become effective as of January 1st of 2003, but is currently undergoing revision pursuant to Assembly Bill 2485. AB 2485 revised the program provisions regarding eligibility, application, selection, and placement. And as such, dental board staff have devised an action plan which outlines the changes to be made to the program. And that action plan is included in the memo as attachment 1. And within the action plan, of course, we discuss the revision of the loan repayment application. The loan repayment application needs to be updated to incorporate the updated eligibility criteria and selection and placement factors. So there is a rough draft of the revised application that's included with the memo as attachment 2. And I do want to stress that this is a rough draft of the application that will be reviewed by our legal team at a future date. And also, the dental board has created an annual progress report that the awardee must submit to the dental board while participating in the loan repayment program. Previously, we had required that the participant provide an annual verification of employment from the program participant, but the progress report form is a new concept that was implemented pursuant to Assembly Bill 2485. A rough draft of the progress report is included as attachment 3, and as this is a newly implemented item, it will be reviewed by our legal team at a future date. The board is also currently developing regulations to coincide with the changes made pursuant to Assembly Bill 2485. And the development of regulations will reflect the revised eligibility criteria and the selection factors. This is considered a priority among dental board staff, and we are working closely with management to begin the rulemaking process as soon as possible. And lastly, the dental board's website will be updated to reflect the changes that have been made to the loan repayment program. One update that we would like to make to the website is that we would like to add a link to the health professional shortage area, also known as HPSA search engine. The HPSA search engine will allow potentially eligible candidates to locate qualified underserved clinics and thus allowing them to participate in the program. And also the website will be updated to reflect the revised application and related code sections, as well as the new regulations when applicable. And again, I do want to stress that this is considered a priority, and we will be updating the website at a future date as the items are updated.
Thank you. Any questions on this? This is another one that's been a long time in the works. This program's been around. It hasn't been very well utilized. We've had a number of forays into trying to fix this by different means so the money actually gets used. I think we might be there. So
Getting closer anyway. I have a question regarding the application form for the dental loan repayment on page, under section 2, which would be on page 2, item number 5 and 6. Question on the application form is, have you completed a specialty residency program approved by the Commission on Dental Accreditation? And number 6, recognized by the American Dental Association. I'm questioning the advisability of limiting it to approved by Commission on Dental Accreditation and also approved by the American Dental Association. There's a lot of controversy going on at the present time, possibly you know or don't know, that some recent court rulings that the American Dental Association does not have the power or the ability to limit who can be a specialist and who can't, or what area can be a specialty. There's been some court decisions that have not been in favor of the ADA in that, and this might be a discriminatory situation here where a person who had a specialty training that was not recognized by CODA or not recognized by the ADA would not be eligible for this loan repayment.
And in response to Dr. Moreau, I did want to specify that some of the questions that are on the loan repayment application are strictly for the purpose of priority consideration, not necessarily whether the applicant would qualify for the program, but just, you know, who would be granted priority consideration. So just because an applicant had answered no to these questions wouldn't necessarily disqualify them from the program.
Might not necessarily, but it could.
No. As far as, Sarah, would you like to comment?
Well, I'd also like to say that legal hasn't reviewed this yet, and I'm sure these types of things will be brought to the attention of the board after Michael's had an opportunity. I see where you're going with that. We can't ask anymore, even our subject matter experts essentially, we can't ask if they are in an approved specialty. We'll have to figure out another way to ask the question.
So and this would obviously have to go through the rulemaking process, and then once it's reviewed by legal counsel and we get the approval, we could post it as a courtesy application that applicants can submit while we're going through that rulemaking process. But all of these issues would be taken into consideration.
And also, just in addition to that, there are CODA-approved advanced dental education programs that are not classified as specialty. They are advanced general dentistry education programs. And this question is limiting it to a specialty program.
We'll take a look at that. Thank you, Dr. Morrow.
anything else? Okay, I'd like a motion.
It's just an update.
Oh, just an update, I'm sorry. Okay. Well, this brings us to the finish of today's business. And with that, I'd like to go into recess and convene. Let's take a 10-minute break. and come back and resume in closed session. So if anybody's interested, we do have dinner reservations over at Arden Way at 7 p.m. and anyone's welcome to join us. And we'll, you know,
Any particular
50,
place?
52,
Oh, Seasons 52.
Seasons 52. It wasn't Area 51.
And you might want to say what time we convene
7.
tomorrow.
We will reconvene at
9:30 tomorrow.
9:30 tomorrow morning.
I'm sorry, tomorrow?
Well, that's after closed session, in other words. Yeah, the board will reconvene an open session at 9:30 tomorrow morning.